Welcome, everyone. We'll start promptly at 12:30. Welcome to today, April 22nd, 2021, Enforcement Compounding Committee meeting. My name is Maria Serpa, and I'm chairperson of this committee. Before we convene, I would like to advise all individuals observing or participating in the meeting that the meeting is being conducted consistent with the provisions of Governor Gavin Newsom's Executive Order N-2920. Participants watching the webcast will only be able to observe the meeting. Anyone interested in participating in the meeting must join the WebEx. Information and instructions are posted on our website. I will announce when we are accepting public comment on the various issues, and the meeting moderator will open the lines. I have advised the moderator to allot 2 minutes to each individual providing comments. This approach is necessary to facilitate this meeting and ensure the committee has the opportunity to complete its necessary business. I appreciate everyone's understanding and patience as we navigate this meeting format for our committee meeting today. I would like to ask the staff moderating the meeting to provide a general instruction on how to participate at the appropriate times through the meeting. Moderator?
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. I would like to remind committee members and senior staff who are not speaking to mute their microphone. If I detect background noise during the meeting as a result of unmuted microphones, I will interject with a brief friendly reminder or simply mute the microphones. To facilitate public comment, we will be utilizing the WebEx question and answer feature, also referred to as the Q&A panel. When the committee chairperson reaches a point in the agenda at which public comment is appropriate, public comment will be requested. At the committee's direction, I will turn on and announce the opening of the Q&A feature, and we will display the instructions you see on your screen now. It is not necessary to identify yourself in order to make a public comment. Please note that the Q&A feature is being used only as a means for members of the public to represent that they would like to make a verbal comment. Once unmuted, the member of the public may verbally state their comment. The Q&A feature is not to be used for typing out questions or for committee members to communicate with each other. If any attendee utilizes a profane name, they will not be called upon to prevent members of the public from being subjected to profane language. While you are free to express criticism or negative views, for the sake of the members of the public participating on the call, please do not use profane language when making public comments to the committee. And thank you, Madam Chair. I return the meeting back to you.
Thank you. I would like to now take a roll call and establish a quorum. Members, as I call your name, please unmute your lines before speaking. Our Vice Chair, Mr. Jig Patel.
I'm here. Good afternoon. Happy Earth Day.
Thank you. Mr. Greg Lippy.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Ricardo Sanchez. I heard him earlier.
No, I'm here. Happy birthday.
Thank you, Ricardo. Ms. Debbie Veal.
Here.
Thank you, Debbie. Dr. Albert Wong.
I'm here.
Thank
Hello,
you, Albert.
everybody.
Good day. With a quorum being established, the committee will now entertain any public comment for items not on the agenda. To facilitate this portion of the meeting, as I previously announced, the moderator will open up the line for individuals to provide public comment. You are not required to identify yourself, but may do so. As we open the lines, I would like to remind everyone that the committee cannot take action on these items except to decide whether to place them on a future agenda. Moderator, we're ready for public comment.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. I have opened up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to make a comment, please type, "I would like to make a comment," and submit it to all panelists. We are displaying instructions for your reference. This is the moderator. I see no request for public comment at this time. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Please do. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So having no public comment, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is number 3, the approval of the January 20th Enforcement and Compounding Committee meeting minutes. Members, are there any comments on the minutes? I will also entertain a motion to approve the minutes if there are no comments.
So moved.
Thank you, Greg. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. That was good. Thank you. With a motion and a second on the floor, I open for discussion for public comment. Moderator, please open the lines.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. The Q&A panel is now available. If anyone would like to make a comment, please type, "I would like to make a comment," using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and submit it to all panelists. We are displaying instructions.
I don't hear any public comment. Thank you. We'll
You're
do a
welcome.
roll.
I'll go ahead and close.
Go ahead. Thank you. We'll do a roll call vote. Jig Patel.
Here.
Yes to the motion?
Yes to the motion.
Thank you. Greg Lippy.
Yes.
Ricardo Sanchez.
Yes.
Thank you. Debbie Veal.
Yes.
Albert Wong. Albert Wong's on mute. And the chair votes yes. Motion passes. We'll note that Albert did not vote unless he comes on in a few minutes. Moving on to the next item. Approval of the February 18th minutes, which was an informational meeting on white bagging. Members, do you have any comments on the minutes? And I will also entertain a motion to approve if there aren't any comments.
I move
Motion
that
to
we approve. And I'll second it. Yeah, that's Debbie. I can either be the first or the second, whatever you prefer.
You take first, I'll be the second.
Okay.
Okay, so that was Debbie and Greg.
Yes.
Okay, with a motion and second on the floor, I will now take discussion for public comment. Moderator, can you please open the lines?
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. I have opened up the Q&A panel. If anyone would like to make a comment, please type, "I would like to make a comment," using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and submit it to all panelists. We are displaying instructions. All right, we have an individual identified as Rita Shane that would like to make a comment. So Rita, I'll let you know when you've been unmuted. Just a reminder, you have 2 minutes. I will give you a 10-second warning. And Rita, you have been unmuted.
Hi, thank you. I really was more of just a clarification. Since I'm not able to see the minutes, I was wondering if there was a summary of next steps with respect to white bagging. It was more of a question than a comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Shane. From what I understand, the minutes and the presentation of the meeting will be at the next full board meeting at the end of the month. Anne, can you confirm that that's on the agenda for the full board meeting?
Yes, a summary of the discussion will be provided during the board meeting.
Great. So at that point, they'll decide if what next steps may be determined.
All right, that was the only request for public comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, we're ready to do a roll call vote. Jig Patel.
Yes.
Greg Lippy.
Yes.
Ricardo Sanchez.
Yes.
Debbie Veal.
Yes.
Albert Wong. Okay, we'll note that Albert did not vote. And this is Maria Serpa. I vote yes, so motion passes. Thank you. Our next item on the agenda is the presentation on the National Association of Boards of Pharmacy Compounding Data Sharing Project. As you may recall, during our January meeting, we discussed the FDA's final MOU on interstate distribution of compounded drug products. Detailed in the chair report is the information on the conditions of the agreement. I will not read all of this information, but note that the agreement establishes provisions for the investigation of complaints relating to compounded products distributed outside of California, defines and establishes reporting requirements for the distribution of inordinate amounts of products, and mandates the submission and disclosure of such information. During our prior discussion, it was determined that it would be beneficial for the committee to learn more about the information sharing system developed by NABP to facilitate some of the reporting and information sharing requirements of the MOU. I'd like to now introduce Dr. Melissa Madigan, Associate Executive Director, Professional Affairs with National Association of Boards of Pharmacy, and Frances Gail Bormel, Acting Director, the Office of Compounding Quality and Compliance with the FDA.
Hi, thank you very much for having us. One thing though, I've noticed that Gail dialed in and it doesn't appear that she's able to speak. Is that something that can be, can she be added to the speaker?
Moderator, can you promote Gail?
I'm looking for her as an attendee and I'm not seeing her name.
She's area code 301. I believe she was number 5.
Okay, so I can't promote her to be able to mute and unmute herself, but I can unmute her manually and then she can mute and unmute herself. So
she'll need she won't be speaking till after I'm done, so
okay, I'll mute her. If she just mutes herself now, she can. Frances, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes, and so if you mute yourself.
I will mute myself. Yeah, I'll mute myself and then wait till after Melissa's done. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for giving us the time to present on this subject. I'm first going to show you, and I know you already have the slides in your packet, but these slides here just list some of the many questions that we've had from our members, from stakeholder pharmacies, from just a lot of different interested parties. We're hoping that many of these questions are answered in this presentation. Some have already been answered and are posted on our webpage or FDA's webpage, and some are still being worked out. So just hoping that this provides enough information for you, for your committee. So these are the questions. But so just back to the basics, what exactly will boards that sign the MOU need to do? Just high level, they need to investigate certain compounding pharmacy complaints, report certain compounding pharmacy and compounding physician complaints to FDA, report certain information about compounding physician offices, and identify and report to FDA certain compounding pharmacy data. And how will NABP's information sharing network tool help? We are developing this tool so that all of these responsibilities can be done through our system very easily. Getting down to more specifics regarding what boards need to report. Boards need to report pharmacies that are compounding human drug products and distributing inordinate amounts interstate, including their compounding data. And I'm going to get to the inordinate amounts in a second. I should mention, and if you look at the sidebar, that the distribution of inordinate amounts interstate is merely a threshold for the boards of pharmacy to identify and report the information to FDA. It's not a limit on the distribution of compounded products interstate by a pharmacy. That's one of the main questions that we had, and so we wanted to emphasize that right up front. The boards also need to report complaints of serious adverse experiences or serious product quality issues relating to human drug products compounded by pharmacies and distributed interstate. And the term serious adverse experiences or quality issues is defined in the MOU. A board also needs to report complaints of adverse experiences or quality issues related to products compounded by a physician. and distributed interstate. So a lower level of the problem. And again, that term is defined in the MOU. Also, the board is responsible for reporting information relating to the distribution interstate of any amount of human drug products compounded by physicians. And we'll get to a little more detail about all those in a second. So regarding inordinate amounts, the MOU allows boards to determine if a pharmacy is compounding inordinate amounts using either surveys. They could go on site and they can audit the pharmacies. They can review the records during inspections, or they can use our information sharing network or any other available mechanism that works. So if a board comes up with a novel way to do it, FDA is open to working with the board on that mechanism. What we want to emphasize is the MOU doesn't require the board to input any compounding pharmacy data into the information sharing network. And we and ABP are going to be relying, for the most part, on pharmacies inputting that information. And the MOU allows the board to meet its obligation to determine compounding of inordinate amounts solely through the use of the information sharing network. So we're developing this network, just a little background, using a grant that we received from FDA. FDA realized that there was no centralized system to collect all this information. It is a large amount of information, or could potentially be, and thus the grant was established to help make that happen. FDA agrees that the network will be key to assisting the boards in their efforts to comply with the MOU, and they're really eager to partner with NABP and boards to help all of us protect patients. And that is evidenced by the fact that Gail has participated with me on, I can't tell you how many presentations that I've given. I think she's memorized this presentation by now. So how are we building this information sharing system? What we're doing is we're taking our eProfile Connect system and we're just adapting it to meet the needs of what the MOU requires. For those of you that are not familiar with our eProfile Connect, what it is it's a database that provides boards of pharmacy with information on each individual pharmacist, technician, student intern facility in our system. Just any entity with a license under the board can set up an e-profile, and that information will be made available to the boards. Again, in expanding the eProfile Connect system, what we're really doing is adding the data fields that are outlined in the MOU to that system. The system will allow boards and pharmacies to enter the data. So if a board did happen to have the information and they wanted to provide it, they can. In fact, we are working with some boards that already collect this information and even more to get that information into our system automatically. That's going to be a next step after this system goes live. So we're working with them on that. Boards will also be able to upload documents. So if they, when it comes to complaints, for example, if they would like to upload a copy of the complaint, they can do that into the eProfile system. So the system is going to be notifying boards about pharmacies who submitted data show that they're distributing inordinate amounts of compounded drugs interstate. And the system will require a board of pharmacy to review and approve the submission of this data to FDA prior to it being transmitted. And this is really important because one of the first things that boards asked us is, well, is your system going to send this information directly to FDA without us even knowing about it or notifying us? No. Boards will be reviewing it first, and then they have to push the button, per se, to get that information over to FDA. So what are we specifically going to be collecting from pharmacies? I've outlined the data fields that we are incorporating into our eProfile system. We actually already have name and address of the state license entity in it, so we didn't have to do anything there. But we did add activities: human drug compounding, sterile, non-sterile, patient-specific compounding, non-patient-specific compounding. If a pharmacy is compounding sterile or non-sterile human drug products, the following information will also be collected or calculated, and this is the information that is used to calculate the inordinate amounts calculation. So the number of prescription orders for compounded drugs the pharmacy sent out or caused to be sent out of the facility, whether that's in-state or out of state, and then the number of prescription orders for the compounded drugs dispensed at the facility. So that's actually the total number of compounded products that leave the facility. And then that is what is calculated. I've got a little asterisk there because our system will add that up and calculate it. And then we're also going to be collecting from the pharmacy the total number of prescription orders for those compounded products that are distributed interstate. The system will then calculate the percentage of compounded products distributed interstate, and if it is greater than 50%, then it will be considered an inordinate amount. We will also be collecting the number of prescription orders for sterile compounded products distributed interstate, the names of the states where the pharmacy is licensed, actually that is already in our system, the names of the states into which the pharmacy distributed compounded products during the year, hopefully those match up, and whether the compounded products are distributed without patient-specific prescriptions. Again, I mentioned this earlier, if the board has the compounding pharmacy data, they'll be able to enter it, and as I mentioned, we'll be able to work with them to get that information in there. So when it comes to notifying FDA about inordinate amounts, what information needs to be provided and when? So within 30 business days of identifying a pharmacy that has distributed this amount of compounded products interstate, during an identified calendar year, the system, upon approval by the board, will provide FDA with the following information, and that reflects what I told you are the new data fields. So the name and address of the pharmacy, the numbers that I mentioned, whether or not they are, the names of the states where the pharmacy is licensed, where they've stated that they're distributing these products, and whether the board inspected for and found during its most recent inspection that the pharmacy distributed compounded products without valid prescription orders for individually identified patients. So when it comes to notifying FDA of pharmacy complaints, again, what information? I've outlined the information, the data fields that we've added. We've got the name and contact information of the complainant, if that's available, the name and address of the pharmacy that's the subject of the complaint, a description of the complaint, including a description of the compounded human drug product, board's assessment of whether the complaint is substantiated, if that's available, and a description of any actions taken by the board. Now, the timing of these items is different. The reason being is that items 4 and 5 would generally not be available, back to their assessment and the actions. They would not be available within 5 business days, as the first items 1 through 3 are required to be submitted within that 5 business day period. So the evaluation of whether the complaint has been substantiated and the action taken does not need to be entered into the system until the investigation is complete. When it comes to complaints and notifications about physicians, there's a little less that needs to be provided. So if you've got if you become aware as a board of an adverse drug experience or product quality issue related to a human drug product compounded by a physician, or if you become aware of a physician distributing any amount of human drug products compounded by that physician and distributed outside the state, the board will enter the following information into the system, very similar to the last set of information, the name and contact information of the complainant or the notifier, name and address of the physician, as well as a description of the complaint or notification. When it comes to complaints about a product, the board is obligated to provide that information to FDA as soon as possible, but no later than 5 business days after receipt of that complaint. And the board must also notify the state regulator of physicians during that time period. If it's a notification to FDA about you becoming aware that a physician has compounded products and is distributing them interstate, no complaint, but just you're notified about it. You have 30 business days to provide that information to FDA as well as to the state regulator of physicians. So I'm sure you're wondering to yourself, how are we going to get this data from pharmacies? So we're going to do that through two pathways, and I'm going to talk about the second one first. We're going to get it through the e-profile. I alluded to this earlier. We will, and currently a pharmacy can now enter their e-profile. They can either set one up if they don't have one or access the current one they have and insert the data. And there's no charge for that. And I say there's no charge because we've been asked several times, how much are we going to be charging for this? So no charge. But we are also going to be collecting this information through our certain pharmacy accreditation program applications. So all of them except our DemiPost program, and through our VPP inspection application. And in that case, the pharmacy is going to pay the regular accreditation or inspection application fee. It's not going to be any extra to submit this information. So how are we going to encourage pharmacies to do this? During the pilot project time, we're going to be offering to pharmacies who submit this information the opportunity to be selected to receive a VPP inspection at no cost to them. We've got 150 pharmacies that we're going to be doing that for, and the value of that is around $4,500. So if we have a pharmacy that has submitted this information through a VPP inspection application or accreditation, they will, and they're selected, they will receive a refund of the survey amount. So that's a nice. I should just jumping back for a second. At this point, we are of the understanding that we've got about 40 pharmacies that have submitted this information to us already. We've not even, it's technically active and working. We haven't marketed yet because the whole system is not ready yet. Will be hopefully in the next couple weeks. But we're very happy to hear that we've got more than a few pharmacies that have already done this. So regarding feedback from the boards, most of them right now are in the process of determining whether to sign the MOU. We've got one state that's already signed it. We've got 7 that said that they will sign it, but they have some other action that they need to complete before they can do that. We've got 8 states that say they cannot or will not sign the MOU, but 5 are due to technical or legal issues with that document. And FDA would like to work with them to maybe work through whatever the technical or legal issues are and perhaps be able to come to a point where they can sign it. Some boards have already told us that they currently, I mentioned this earlier, require pharmacies to submit this data to their own systems. And we've got several that are considering requiring pharmacies to submit that data to our systems. So we're happy that that's in discussions. And I mentioned also that we're conversing with several boards about sharing their information that they already have. We have several boards that collect a lot more information than what is required by this MOU. And in those cases, they're interested in us collecting all of the information. We wouldn't submit that to FDA. We're only going to submit what is required by the MOU. But it gives that state a centralized place to look at it and review that information, and the states where the other where the pharmacy might be licensed elsewhere as a non-resident will also be able to access that. So we're also working with other groups to help them educate their members about this. We're working with the Alliance for Pharmacy Compounding, National Home Infusion Association, PCCA. We're giving webinars and helping edit articles, that kind of thing, to make sure that the information that they're providing to their members is accurate and up to date. We also have a new, well, I shouldn't say new, it's relatively new, a website that has a newer page dedicated to this project. So it's got background and details on the project, a link to the MOU, a lengthy FAQs page, which seems to be getting longer every couple weeks because we keep adding new questions and answers, a map of the state's MOU decisions, which I saw in your packet. And then this slide deck is also on the website. And that's all I have right now. Happy to take questions.
Perhaps Francis has something to add, and then we could do questions all together.
Sure. Can you all hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm Frances Gail Bormel. I'm the director of the Office of Compounding Quality and Compliance at FDA, and I have actually I've had a number of different roles through the years. I used to be a state regulator in Massachusetts. I've worked with USP and worked in a number of different areas. But one of the things I can say about this system is that, to me, it's a patient safety tool. And the importance of the MOU, I think, is really the ability to share information centrally among the states and as well as FDA. I mean, I think that we need to be able to use, the information in order to best use our limited resources. So I would remind you of that. I see that as I see this as a patient safety tool, particularly because of the reporting of serious adverse events and serious product quality issues regarding compounded drug products that have been distributed outside the state. I mean, that's going to be very important for all states to have that information. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have on the MOU and, next steps.
Great, thank you. Members, do you have any questions for Dr. Madigan or Ms. Bormel? Remember to unmute if you have any questions. Okay, hearing no questions, moderator, let's open the lines for public comment.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. I will go ahead and open up the Q&A, and then I'll return the presenter rights to my co-moderator so that he can display instructions. All right, if any member of the public would like to make a comment, please type "I would like to make a comment" using the field in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and submit it to all panelists. We are displaying instructions for your review, and we have an individual identified as Gibran Maciel, who would like to make a comment. So Gibran, I will let you know when you've been unmuted, and just please remember that you have a 2-minute time limit. I'll give you a 10-second warning. And Gibran, you've been unmuted.
Hi, thank you so much. This will be a quick question, and thank you for the presentation. The only question I have at this time is what the frequency of submission of the data would be from the pharmacy side. So,
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I can answer that question. So the way the system is set up, and well, the MOU requires there to be 1 year worth of data in order to determine whether or not inordinate amounts are being distributed interstate. So we're doing that on calendar years. So right now the system is accepting data for 2019 and 2020. And so you wouldn't be able to submit data on this year until the beginning of next year. So we anticipate once a year submission.
All right, this is a moderator. Our next comment is from Michael Blair. Michael, I'll let you know when you've been unmuted. All right, Michael, you've been unmuted.
Thank you very much. I actually have 2 questions, one for Dr. Madigan and one for Dr. Bormel. Dr. Madigan, is there a mechanism in the data reporting tool that would be able to segregate out compounds for veterinary patients, since a number of pharmacies do both human and veterinary compounding together?
Well, the MOU is referring only to human drug products.
Exactly.
So the pharmacy should not be reporting any veterinary compounding. We've added wording to the pages where this data is to be submitted, emphasizing that this is for human drug compounding products only and not veterinary.
Okay, but the data collection tool has no way of looking at a species field or a sex field or anything in case by accident the veterinary compound was submitted.
No, there's no there's no reference to veterinary compounding at all in the
Okay.
tool.
Okay, thank you. And then for Dr. Bormel, in the event that this data collection tool is not ready for action by the deadline date of October 26th, would FDA consider an extension on the implementing the enforcement of the MOU?
So right now, FDA is focused on answering state questions and trying to get states answer those questions that states will consider and ultimately sign the MOU. But we are interested if the states are going to have, certain obstacles to signing the MOU. We are interested in learning what those are so we can make a decision about, your question essentially, which is whether we would, delay the implementation / enforcement provision of the 5%.
Okay, thank you.
All right, this is a moderator. I see no further requests for public comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. It's been closed.
Hi, thank you, Dr. Madigan and Ms. Bormel for your presentation. I'm sure you'll be interested in our next item for discussion also, which is a continuation of this topic. Item number 6 is discussion and consideration of the FDA's final MOU on interstate distribution of compounded drug products. Now that we have an understanding on the information sharing project, we can proceed with the discussion on the MOU itself. As included in the meeting materials, there are several states that have declined to sign the MOU, some of which have concluded that they are unable to participate because of legal or technical challenges. Others are considering regulations. 7 states are in the process of entering the MOU, and other states like California are in the process of determining the appropriate course of action. To help us with our discussion today, I suggest that we start with some of the larger policy questions, and depending upon the policy questions discussed, we can proceed with implementation issues as appropriate. As you can see, the next slide has those policy considerations. I suggest that we review each question one at a time. After I share my opinion, I will ask the members for their thoughts on each question. After we've completed the entire list, we will open up the discussion for public comment on all questions all at once. Members, do you have any questions on this process?
No questions.
Great, thank you. We'll continue. So the first question that we are to discuss is looking at the big picture. And we need to confirm if the board has the authority to enter into the MOU. Ms. Smiley, as this question is legal more than policy, I'm hoping you have determined what should the board have the ability to meet this obligation under the MOU, and do we have the authority to enter the MOU itself?
Certainly. Hi, this is Eileen Smiley. As I said at the first meeting, I believe the board does have the power to do it. We currently have the authority to share information with the FDA, maintaining confidentiality. But in this case, it's just a different form of information sharing. And although I'm still looking at exactly what the confidentiality things are with respect to the system, the MOU gives an alternative way to supply information, which we can currently utilize by sending it via email to the FDA. So I do believe we have the authority to enter this. The question will become some of the policy questions, and then we have some follow-up discussions, the executive officer and I next week before the board meeting with respect to the system, but I do believe we have the authority to enter it.
Great, thank you. Members, do you have any questions for Ms. Smiley based on question number 1?
I just had a general question. This is Jig. So the current process is the compounding pharmacist submits it to the board and board submits it to the FDA? And this would streamline the process, correct?
This is Anne. There is currently no reporting requirement. And so we don't currently have access to this data. Under the MOU, there's a requirement to have the data. So when we talk about some of the other questions later on, the staff is offering some possible suggestions.
Got it. Thank you.
Right. So this is a new process. Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Smiley on number 1? Okay, let's go on to number 2. I believe that it is appropriate for us to consider the potential benefits and negative impacts to California consumers for the board to enter into such an agreement. Just as a review, we have received a lot of testimony at past meetings and written comments provided to this meeting and in our supplemental materials that speak to the impact to consumers outside of California. I don't see very much about the impact of consumers inside of California. The only thing that I could think of was that perhaps compounding pharmacies may move out of state, resulting in fewer options for the special needed items for the California consumers. So members, I'd like to hear from you. Do you see any impacts to California consumers should we enter into the MOU?
Maria, this is Debbie. I'm just thinking, maybe I read this back, that pharmacies would move out of state if we didn't sign the MOU, right?
I'm sorry, you broke up a little bit there. Did anybody hear Debbie, or Debbie, can you repeat that?
Yes, I'd be happy to repeat it. I might have the words, but I was thinking people would move out of state if we did not sign the MOU. Is that correct? I mean, not people. Pharmacies would move out of state if we did not sign the MOU.
I would assume that would be a potential. I can't say that would happen, but if we do not sign the MOU, the pharmacies within the state could not send out their product to other people outside the state. And
But if we do sign the MOU, that would not cause the pharmacy to move out of state, would it?
I would believe it would have no impact to them. Anne or Ms. Smiley, any comments on that?
This is Anne. I don't believe that we've received any testimony indicating that if we sign, a pharmacy is going to leave California.
Okay, thank you. That's kind of how I understood.
Yeah, the other thing that I would maybe just say is I believe that we did receive testimony previously about California residents that when they travel out of state could potentially not have access to their medications when they're traveling or, visiting relatives or whatever, because the pharmacy may not be able to ship to them at that location.
Once again, if we do not sign the MOU.
Correct.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's some, I hear some, I don't know if any others hear this, but I hear some like clicking or tapping or something. I don't know if we need to all make sure we're muted when we're not talking.
Thank you. Any other member comment on number 2 regarding California consumers? So the next question is really about what are the potential positive or negative impacts to compounding pharmacies and residents outside of California if we do not enter into the MOU. I think we had a little bit of discussion there, but members, do you have any comments?
Well, if we don't sign the MOU, couldn't that cause pharmacies outside of California to pick up slack and possibly be filling those prescriptions? I mean, I'm not sure it would impact. It seems like people inside the state. I guess if we don't sign the MOU and pharmacies move outside the state, or residents have to get prescriptions from people out from pharmacies outside the state, then we kind of lose our ability to control compounding in those pharmacies to some extent. And I think we've done a great job in making sure we have a very strong compounding program within California. So that's my thoughts.
Yeah, additionally, I think that we need to remember that we did have testimony at previous meetings regarding the special compounding functions that are solely provided by people in California. So they're providing that service to people outside of the state that they found unable to get in other states. And so outside of the state, people are coming to pharmacies in California to provide them their special medications. Greg?
Maria?
Sure, just a moment. Greg, was that you or was that Albert a moment ago?
This Albert.
Okay, go ahead, Albert.
Yeah, let me make sure I understand that. If we don't sign the MOU, does the outside special pharmacy can provide medicine to the Californian?
We have no impact on that. That would not be.
No impact. Yeah, they
would,
could come to us, but we cannot go to them.
Correct.
Okay. All right.
Well, they could only go to us if they are appropriately licensed as an outside pharmacy, out-of-state pharmacy. Any other comments on number 3? I think looking at these 3 points that it appears it is appropriate for us to enter into an MOU and to move forward on recommending something to the board. But we still have some more discussion, but I just wanted at this point to kind of do a spot check here. What's the consensus of the members? Can we do like a straw poll before we go on to the next part of the discussion? Does it appear that this is something that we should do, that California should enter into the MOU? Members?
Maria, this is Debbie. I would agree with you.
Maria,
at this point,
this is Ricardo. I agree with you.
This is Greg. I agree.
Since this is not negatively affecting California, so I'm for it too.
Okay, so I just wanted to make sure that we were all on the same path so that we can help with the next part of the discussion. But before we move on, since we're going to move on to other things other than policy, I wanted to open up to public comment on the larger policy issues. So strictly about the policy and us as a board moving forward on offering a recommendation. Moderator, can you open up for public comment? And again, this is about policy considerations.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. I have opened up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to make a comment, please type, "I would like to make a comment," using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and submit it to all panelists. We are displaying instructions. This is the moderator. We have an individual identified as Stephen Gray that would like to make a comment. Stephen, I'll let you know when you have been unmuted. Just a reminder, you'll have 2 minutes and I'll give you a 10-second warning. All right, Stephen, you've been unmuted.
Thank you very much. I just had a question to dig a little bit deeper, maybe from Attorney Smiley, and for consideration by the board, is that according to this MOU, we would, the California would be supplying information about physician compounding. And I know there's issues about how to get that information and collect it, but would it be important to have this discussion with the medical board first, or let basically physicians know in some way that the California Board of Pharmacy, after they sign this MOU, is going to be obligated to provide information to the FDA about physician compounding, and that is before we make the policy decision, should that be something that is discussed and or investigated? Thank you.
Ms. Smiley, did you have any comments, or Ann?
I would say to Mr. Gray that you can count on the fact that our agencies talk amongst each other. The MOU with respect to the physician compounding is much more narrow than the pharmacy. It's if we become aware of it and that we report things to the board as well.
So, Ms. Smiley, you're saying that as we become aware of it, we will report it, but it would be not a requirement for the board to proactively get information from physicians.
That's correct.
Thank you.
All right, our next comment is from C. Fawn. And C, you have been unmuted.
Yes, thank you for giving me some time here. I am from McGuff Compounding Pharmacy, and I wanted to provide some additional information to a petition, a collection of signatures about the MOU that we submitted to the board this past Monday. At that time, we had about 2,500 signatures collected. As of this morning, that grew to over 3,500 signatures. 37% of which are from California residents and 62% are from outside, people who are very concerned about their access to medications. I am happy to hear that the committee is considering to be in favor of signing the MOU, and I want to make a comment about the impact to California residents. There seem unless I'm mistaken, there seems to be thinking that the California resident won't be impacted. I would disagree with that because California is seen as a leader in many things. If the committee decides not to sign the MOU, other state boards, I fear, will follow suit. And if that happens, we will have California residents who may be getting medication from other states being impacted because no one compounding pharmacy can make all the compounding medications that our patients need. So I just want to bring that up and make sure that the board is aware California residents will be impacted in one way or another.
Thank you, Mr. Pham. You made reference to a petition being turned in on Monday, and I wanted to ask board staff if you received any written documentation from Mr. Pham or anything like he talks about the petition. Is that in the record?
It is, and yes, I believe it's also posted and was submitted to the members.
Great, thank you.
All right, this is the moderator. I see no further requests for public comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
So it sounds like we have agreement in a straw poll about policy. So the next part would be, before we actually get to a motion, is let's have some discussion about how we would implement this policy. So there are several questions that are included in the meeting materials that will help us to go through this discussion. And to draw note also in attachment 4, so if you have your package next to you, please draw note to attachment 4 because there are some actual suggested statutory language that we could also use for our discussion. So this will be posted on a future slide here, but if you have it near you, it will help you with some of the discussions. So again, we're going to look at a few questions to help us thoughtfully consider some of the implementation steps. And the board will discuss the steps all one at a time, and then we'll open up for public comment for the entirety. So the first question, as you see on the bullet points here, is if the board should require as a condition of renewal that a pharmacy advise the board that it distributes compounded preparations outside of California. So that's the first bullet point. And obviously, I think that this is important because it would allow the board to monitor for compliance as required by the MOU. So I think this would be a requirement. Board members, do you have any comments on number 1?
This is Debbie Maria. I agree with you.
Thank you. Any other comments? And thank you for your patience for allowing us to go through these points methodically. Number 2, should the board establish a requirement for such pharmacies to report sales to the information sharing network as provided in the MOU? As we noted, the biggest challenge with the MOU is the reporting requirements. I believe that requiring pharmacies to complete this section and reporting is appropriate and will make implementation more feasible for our state. Members, do you have any comments?
Well, once again, Maria, this is Debbie. It seems like that's necessary to do the information sharing report. So by sales information sharing, you're referring to the NABP type program?
Yes,
Or you,
right. It's
yeah,
the NABP sharing network.
yeah. I mean, I think that that's the only way to do it, because I don't think we have the bandwidth to have our own program, and they already have something that they've already created something. So I would be in favor of the second bullet.
Great.
Yes,
Number
yes.
Jim?
Yeah,
Sorry.
I agree too, Maria. This is Jig. Um, my only concern was like enforcement of the data submitted.
Right. That's a good point, and we should consider as we move forward in our discussions is how do we establish these requirements, and how do we monitor them and educate and the like. Good point.
Wouldn't we handle it a lot like we do like the cures reporting?
Yeah, we're going to get to that because actually in the suggested language, board staff have come up with some suggestions for us to consider.
Yeah.
So number 3 is, should we establish a requirement for pharmacies to report adverse drug effects and drug quality issues related to compounded drugs? As a board, we're required to investigate such events, and mandatory reporting is required. There are mandatory notification requirements already for sterile compounded products, but as of now, we have no similar requirements for non-sterile preparations. So I believe it's mandatory that such reporting would have to include both sterile and non-sterile elements for adverse drug reporting, and that we include that in our future discussion about opportunities on how to implement this.
Maria, did I read that with the MOU that is, and I think even in the NABP presentation, they stated that we would have to provide information around known complaints. So it's known complaints. So it seems like, I mean, I'm not a big reporter kind of person, but it seems like if we sign the MOU, that might be one of the things we would have to do, even if we don't want to do. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes.
Keep in mind, Debbie, they said serious adverse effects. This just talks about adverse effects. So what's required to be reported are serious adverse effects.
Yeah, but how could we? I mean, how do you draw that line?
I think the pharmacies can determine that.
Yeah, we'll have to discuss that. Actually, hold that as a good point, Greg. I think we'll have to discuss whether we include that in our regulatory submission, a definition, or how to explain that that need and that difference.
Yeah, apparently the MOU does define it, so we could probably use their definition.
Good. Let's go to the next slide. And should we require pharmacies that engage in interstate compounding to affirm their understanding of the conditions of the MOU?
Yeah, we have to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's obvious that we have to have some sort of affirmation or acknowledgement.
Yes.
Number 5, should the board establish confidentiality provisions for the information provided for the FDA directly or through the information sharing network? I think Sally has a couple of comments about the confidentiality. She's brought up some concerns. Ms. Smiley, are you there?
Yes. Here, sorry, I was trying to find my unmute button. With what I've been reviewing, obviously, different agencies can share information. We currently can share information with the FDA, through different methods, but it's subject to confidentiality. What I always get concerned with is, obviously, as a state agency, we can get requests for public records under the Public Records Act in California, and also subpoenas at times. The legislature has given quite a lot of protection under the Public Records Act to our complaints and investigations, and in other aspects, including like Business and Profession Code 4083G, they've given additional support to certain of our, in that case, I think it's an order of correction that it won't be deemed to be a public record you know, unless it's gone through an administrative process or appeal. So I think there are ways that we can work through it. That's why I think we have the authority now. We don't have to use the information sharing network. The FDA has also said we can continue to send things via email to them, but I think some of those things could be addressed, or we could at least ask legislature whether or not they would be willing to do something like that, including would they want to deem the information being submitted by pharmacies into this information sharing network as confidential? And so there's still some issues I'm trying to work through, just trying to understand the security behind the information security sharing network, just to ensure that we maintain the maximum confidentiality for our complaint and investigation files.
Thank you. So I agree. I think we have to include something in our regulatory, either information or in the language itself that deals with the confidentiality issues. But thank you for that information. The last question I think is very is obvious. We're going to have to develop some sort of educational materials just to assure that not only do our licensed public understand the requirements, but they participate in the program. It's not something that just comes up during a routine inspection and they're unaware. So I think let's go to the next slide also, because I think that we're probably at this point where I appreciate board staff have thought that we may be going towards this process or down this path. And so we have suggested some example statutory language that is in Appendix 4, and I know it's on 2 different slides here, but if you have the page in front of you, it's all on 1 page. Something for us to consider as we move forward and for our discussion here before we open up to public comment is looking at the suggested language, and is this something that the board should like to move forward with an official motion to move forward and suggest to the full board to institute a legislative statutory change. So you can see here that the first section is an addition.
Maria, I apologize for my ignorance, but how often does a compounding pharmacy renew their application? Is it annually or biannually?
All facilities renew on an annual basis.
Okay, so by saying they have to do it the next time, that means that we'd be rolling this out over basically 1 year.
Yes, but I also think that people may move in and out of this space, and our, our pharmacy population, changes annually. Well, not annually, but people are, purchased and people leave the marketplace. So it would be an ongoing requirement. It's not a one and done report, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm just thinking if I'm, Joe Compounding Pharmacy, it's within 1 year. Depending on when my license renewal is, I would have to do this, assuming that I'm maintaining it well.
So let's go on to the next slide, because that's where there's a whole new section and new language. And this was to incorporate some of our earlier discussion as making things as a requirement for reporting, the numbers and the adverse events, and you can see the language that's here being suggested. This is all new additional language. I'll give you a few minutes to read this. And as you're reading it, I think our next step would be if you have further discussion. Otherwise, I think I would entertain a motion.
Maria, I just have a question. And once again, it's probably just my ignorance, but that in Section A, between January 1st and March 31st of each year, report all required data into the information sharing network. So you report it once a year. Is that what would happen?
That's what I understood from Dr. Madigan. I don't know if she's still on the line or if anybody else would like to answer.
Yes, you would report it once a year, but you have to report it based on 1 year of data. So a compounding pharmacy isn't going to be able to, just stop shipping interstate to avoid this classification like for a couple of weeks. So they look at the data over a year's period.
And for the record, that was Ms. Smiley answering the question.
Okay.
And hi, this is Melissa Madigan. That is exactly what I was going to say.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I guess the other thing is it reasonable to, and this is what you were saying, Greg, is to report an adverse drug experience within 12 hours?
Well,
and you also, you
interesting.
kind of mentioned earlier, maybe it's a severe adverse drug experience?
Yeah, it's interesting because, I mean, it said you had to report within 5 days, so.
Well, I think this is because of the disconnect on our current regulations. We have regulations now about reporting adverse drug events for sterile products, and there is a time limit for that reporting to the board. So this is reporting to the board all compounded.
What is the time on the sterile products, Maria? Is it 12 hours?
I don't have that right in front of me. Anne, or?
Yeah, so 4127.8, just should you want to look at the law, it's as soon as possible within 12 hours.
That's related
That's
specifically
specific to the
sterile.
recall.
Right.
Yeah.
So this would expand it to all compounded. Sorry, Anne, go ahead.
Yeah. If I could just clarify one more thing. So within the MOU, and it might be helpful if Dr. Madigan can clarify, because I might be getting it wrong. There's different kinds of reporting obligations with respect to complaints. So there is a requirement specific to severe, I think is the word, but then there's also that we need to maintain records of complaints about adverse drug experiences or product quality issues. And that's kind of where we're getting to that information that's above the B on the slide.
So you're saying that the serious adverse experience is going to be within 12 hours as opposed to the 5 days?
Well, I understood the 5 days, Ms. Dr. Madigan, was the 5 days was to be added into the system, but the reporting for the state is within 12 hours to the state.
For sterile?
And suggested language for all.
Okay.
Can you clarify that where the the 5 days is to report to the FDA, but the 12 hours is for the state? Is that correct?
Eileen?
So this is Anne. Yeah, so how the process would work, as I understand it, is they're going to notify the pharmacies, the licensees are going to notify us, and we're asking as drafted for that to be within 12 hours. Under the MOU, we have 5 business days or 5 days to make that report to the FDA. But I'm hopeful maybe Dr. Madigan would be able to clarify that.
Hi, yes. So under the MOU, the board is obligated to investigate reports of adverse drug experiences or adverse product quality issues related to compounded products that are distributed interstate by pharmacies. If it is determined that it is a severe or serious, adverse drug experience or product quality issue, then that has to be reported to FDA within 5 business days. And it's just, so it's going to just be a very high level evaluation because you're going to need to do that within 5 business days, but then you do have the opportunity, obviously, to investigate it, and then when the investigation is done, that's when you'll submit the outcome.
So it's within 5 days of learning about it, but like you said, we could investigate it and decide it's not serious.
So it's within
from a
5.
practical.
I'm sorry.
Who's going to answer? Dr. Madigan?
I'm just running back to my slides to make sure that I've got the wording correct.
Mhm. And keep in mind, the requirements of the MOU are operational, and what we're looking at on the screen is California regulation that we're requiring our licensees to do. So they're a little bit different, but it's related.
Understood.
Yeah.
If I can, while Dr. Madigan's looking, so from a practical standpoint, we're going to need some time to evaluate the complaint about the adverse drug experience or the quality issue to then meet before we can make a determination whether or not it's a serious one that's going to need to be reported. So we're going to need a little bit of time to do that so that we can fulfill our reporting obligation under the MOU.
So, Ann, is that what you're saying, is the difference between the 12 hours and 5 days? That's the time period you're going to use to investigate?
Yeah,
We're
because
not going to
we're
be
only
able
going
to
to
do
find
a
out.
complete. We're not going to be able to do a complete investigation within that time period, but we might be able to do cursory review, kind of like what we would do to determine if we needed to do an ISO or that kind of thing.
Well, considering that serious adverse drug experience is defined as a drug experience that where the outcome is death or a life-threatening drug experience, something requiring hospitalization, I think it won't take a lot of investigating to find out if that's what happened.
Mm-hmm. I think as you're going through this discussion, one of the things I do like is the harmonizing of all compounded products with sterile compounded products, which is currently under regulation. Harmonizing it, I think, is great.
Right.
Yeah, and I just, so my question to that is, it seems like the non-sterile, I mean, we're kind of kicking the non-sterile up to like a higher level now, and is that, I mean, is that creating a business barrier, or is that making us smart? And that, you know, once again, my ignorance of not being in the compounding world. I don't know, Maria, if you have an opinion on that.
Well, I think it's talking about reporting, and so I don't think there's any difference on once you're informed to report versus investigating. So the only thing that could cause an issue, but it would be an issue also with the sterile products, is should the pharmacy be closed for more than 12 hours? But as long as it's being reported during your open hours, you should be able to meet that 12-hour turnaround time to report it to the board. I can't see any barrier there.
Do we need to say something like within 12 hours of knowing about it? What, I don't know what the right word is, but within 12 hours, you know, of knowing it versus just, I mean, I'm a little bit afraid just within 12 hours period.
So Ann, what is it? I'm sorry. So Ann, what does it say for sterile, the regulations say for sterile products now?
So I'm just reading from 4127.8, so I'm going to skip part of it, but it says, issues a recall notice regarding a sterile compounded drug shall, in addition to other duties, contact the pharmacy, prescriber, patient, and the board as soon as possible within 12 hours of the recall notice if both of the following apply.
So that's, David's part is a good one. So it's notify in the second from the bottom paragraph, shall be reported to the board within 12 hours of notification.
Recall notice.
Well, we're not talking about recall. It's different for this one.
Yeah. Notification, that's the word I was looking for.
12 hours of notification. That could be something that you could include in your, whoever wants to state the motion, because right now we're just doing discussion. We have no motion on the table.
You know, Maria, I feel like we've pounded this out enough. I'm willing to throw a motion out there.
Great, thanks, Debbie.
And I would look to Ms. Smiley to help me kind of wordsmith my motion, because I'm sure you'll be able to help me.
Sure.
But I would recommend to the full board that we move forward with the draft statutory proposal related to interstate distribution of compounded medications, including the amendment to section 4110 A, as well as adding section 4126.9 with the one change in 4126.9 to have within 12 hours of notification in A3.
And would you like to add a delegation to the executive officer to work with the legislature to find a sponsor and work on appropriate other language?
I would love to add that. Yes, thank you.
Very nicely stated motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay.
With your approval, could I'm sorry, this is Ann. I apologize for interrupting. Ms. Beal, would you be agreeable to adding in there also the recommendation to enter into the MOU?
Good point.
And I would love to add that in there to recommend to the full board that not only we make these changes, but also enter into the MOU.
And enter into the MOU once the changes are done, that we have the ability to do the reporting required?
Woof, that's a good question. Is that okay, or do we need to do the MOU and
We might not be able to meet the deadline, so how, is there a way to word the motion such that there is not a timing issue? Ann or Ms. Smiley, do you have an idea?
I think it would be a motion to enter into the MOU, provided that we can get the reporting mechanism in place and the changes, the statutory changes that were suggested, to use that as a starting point and delegate to the executive officer the ability to work with the legislature to effectuate the changes.
Well, should that be a separate motion, the MOU part?
I think you can do both, maybe just first have them go forward, but my rec would be not to sign the MOU until we know we're going to have the reporting ability to comply with it.
Okay.
Ann, did you have any other comments?
So, yeah, I think it would be premature to sign the MOU if we cannot fulfill the obligations of the MOU. And I don't see how we can fulfill the obligations without both the statutory change, but then we're also going to need a little bit of resource. And that all takes time to secure.
So does the motion as stated meet that need?
I think you better restate it.
I think the motion as stated takes care of our concerns, but I'm not sure, and I think there's a lot of questions out there as far as like meeting the need and, you know, how long it will take to get the statutory change as far as even like the MOU. I mean, would we try to do this like as an emergency bill? Because I guess my other worry is I don't want, you know, as we talked in the prior slides, I mean, I don't want to put pharmacies in California at a disadvantage because we're trying to madly get statute in place. I understand we got to do it that way, but I mean, can we work with the FDA so that you know, we don't disadvantage the pharmacies in California, and not only the pharmacies, the public in California?
Yeah, so we have reached out to ask if there's an opportunity for the FDA to delay enforcement of the 5% rule. We have a follow-up meeting with them scheduled for next week, and we have shared, some of these logistical concerns with the FDA. So they are aware and hopeful that, there will be a path forward that will mitigate many of the concerns that you all have mentioned with delayed signature on the MOU.
Okay. So I think as long as the minutes show the motion as stated and it meets the needs and the timing issues of when to sign the MOU versus how we will have the timing of regulatory changes. And Ms. Smiley, do you feel comfortable with the motion as stated?
I think I do. I think, Ann, you were trying to see whether you wanted, as part of the motion, the board's intention that they would like to enter the MOU, provided that they have the ability to comply with it, and then the motion, as we stated with Debbie, about pursuing the statutory changes and the delegation to the executive officer. I think that does work. And do you have any other thoughts?
No, I'll totally defer to council on that. Sorry. But so in the notes where I'm kind of capturing the essence of the conversation, and I'll go back and listen to the recording specifically, but it's, making the statutory changes that Debbie articulated, and then enter into the MOU provided sufficient resources and statutory changes are secured.
Debbie, does that sound great?
Yes.
That sounds great. That's kind of what I was thinking. I guess I didn't articulate it very well.
It's very complicated, so I appreciate everyone's working on this as a team. But we do have a motion, and I just need a second.
Second.
Okay. Any other comments from board members before we go to public comment? I think we have talked a lot. And we're ready for public comment then on the motion and proposed language for statutory change.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have opened up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to make a comment, please type "I would like to make a comment" and submit it to all panelists. We are displaying instructions for your reference. And we have an individual by the name of Danny Martinez that would like to comment. Danny, I'll let you know when you've been unmuted. Just a reminder, you have a 2-minute time limit, and I will give a 10-second warning. Danny, you've been unmuted.
Thank you very much. Danny Martinez with the California Pharmacists Association. I want to note that CPHA does not have an official position on the MOU. However, given that there is there's proposed language, statutory language, a suggestion that I would like to propose under 4126.9 A, the word human should be added before compounded preparations. We want to make sure that, because the way the language reads right now, this applies to all compounded preparations, and the fact that pharmacies may only distribute preparations under these conditions. We know that veterinary compounders are not subject to the MOU. However, the way this is written, that the veterinary compounders would be prohibited from distributing compounded preparations when they have no incentive to join the MOU. So I would just suggest adding the word human before compounded preparations. Thank you.
That's an interesting comment. Anne or Ms. Smiley, would that impact any other regulations that do deal with veterinary products if this section is solely limited to human drug products?
This is Anne. I don't believe so. We could put that in. I think where we'll need to be very careful is if we decide to make conforming changes to other provisions of the statute, we are going to have to be mindful. Because the way that it's drafted, the provision that Mr. Martinez is referring to is specific to the provisions for interstate compounding. I do not believe that it would have consequence there, but if we make conforming changes in other areas of the statute, we'll have to be very mindful.
I do have a follow-up question then too. Does that mean that number 3, where we did all this discussion about adverse drug experiences, would only qualify for interstate compounded products and not all compounded products?
Moderator, could you go back to that slide, please, with the language?
Because then would that imply that if I did a non-sterile compound, but it was for a patient in California, I would not have to report it?
I don't know. It says down there for all compounded products.
Even though above it, it talks about interstate commerce.
Yeah, 4216.9 leads off with distribution of compounded drugs in interstate commerce by pharmacies located in California, as Maria was indicating. So it appears that the whole section only applies to the interstate commerce drugs.
Well, and I would not be adverse to continuing as we go, but as maybe as a topic for discussion on another meeting is adverse drug experiences for all compounded products be discussed separately, leaving it here for the interstate, but talking about more globally in a different agenda item as a different topic.
Makes sense. So Debbie, do you want to change your motion to add human to this?
Yeah, I would be agreeable to that.
I agree as a second.
And I guess, I know Mr. Martinez suggested it just in that section A, but do we even make it part of the title 42-116.9, distribution of human compounded drugs and interstate commerce by pharmacies, just to make it clear?
Probably makes sense.
As long as the language is the same as what is in the MOU, I just don't want to wordsmith it.
Oh, okay.
So,
so Ms. Smiley, do we need to add to our motion to allow the executive officer and the committee chair to, give them the delegated authority to do any further non-substantive wordsmithing?
I would do that. That's why I wanted the delegation to the executive officer. And I think adding the chair is a good idea as we start to make the conforming changes necessary to effectuate the board's intent to, enter in the MOU.
Okay.
So I think that would be a good addition.
Frank, you were the secretary.
I'm good with it.
Yeah, as we're cross-referencing, if members are agreeable, because we're cross-referencing the MOU that only speaks to human compounding, I'll need to work with council and Chair Serpa offline. I'm not quite sure we need to add in human as I'm rereading the language because we're speaking specific to the MOU and the MOU does not apply to veterinary compounding.
So Anne, even I don't see where it talks about the MOU. Yeah, we'll work on that. Okay.
Yeah, I guess my only comment is let's make sure it's clear because
right.
We don't want anybody to misunderstand just because we don't have the word human thrown in here. If they're not familiar with that memorandum of understanding established by the FDA addressing certain distribution. I mean, I get what you're saying, Ann, but if we need to throw a human in there every so often to make it clear, I think it might be better. But I will delegate that to you and Maria to work through.
Great, thank you. So the second, did you agree to that?
I agree. Yes.
Okay, let's continue on with public comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our next request for public comment is from John Gray. John, you'll have a 2-minute time to speak. And John, you've been unmuted.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. This is John Gray. I'm a registered pharmacist with Kaiser Permanente. Just want to commend the committee and the board for its really thoughtful approach to reviewing the FDA MOU on interstate distribution of compounded drug products. And we thank the committee for the opportunity to provide feedback today. Kind of going back to some of the discussion that the committee just had, in my reading of the proposed text of 4126.9, it is clearly heavily implied that only pharmacies that engage in interstate distribution of compounded preparations need to meet the 3 conditions in the proposed statute, and we are supportive of that direction. However, in my view, it might be of benefit to tighten up the language in proposed 4126.9A to make it really crystal clear that requirement only applies to pharmacies that are engaged in interstate distribution of compounded preparations. I would suggest something like 4126.9A to read, a pharmacy located in California that distributes compounded preparations for interstate distribution shall, and then you have sub 1, sub 2, and sub 3. And I think sub 1 and sub 2 would work with no editing, and then sub 3 would probably just need some minor wordsmithing to move probably the within 12 hours of notification up to the front. Again, recognize you may not want to do it off the cuff and may want to think about that, which it sounds like the motion will allow, but just wanted to provide those thoughts. So thank you very much for the opportunity to provide feedback.
Thank you, Dr. Gray. I think that in our discussions that I have with council and with Ann Sodegren, we could look at rewording that sentence as one of the non-substantial changes if it is required. Board members, any follow-up on Dr. Gray's comment?
No, except that it's pretty clear at the beginning that it is just for interstate.
Yeah, that's what I thought, but I think I'll discuss that more with council to see what they think. And then it would be part of the non-substantive changes if we decided to restructure the sentence.
That's fine.
Thank you, Greg. Let's go on with public comment.
All right, our next request for public comment is from an individual identified as Rachel T. Rachel, you will have 2 minutes. I'll give you a 10-second warning. And Rachel, you've been unmuted.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. My comment is actually the same as Mr. Danny Martinez from CPHA mentioned earlier about please adding language to the proposed regarding human, or making it clear that it only applies to human medications or prescriptions. Mrs. Veal, I appreciate your comment on adding it even possibly to the title. And Ms. Sodergren, while I understand your comment that the MOU is pretty clear it's only for human, it would really be appreciative if the language was actually included in the regulation as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, our next request for public comment is from C. Pham. C, I'll let you know you've been unmuted. And C, you've been unmuted.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to ask the question as I was a little bit confused about the specific motion. I believe I understand that there's an agreement to recommend to enter into the MOU depending on certain resources available. Could you clarify exactly what the concerns or the exact wording of the motion, please?
Well, the motion is in general to enter into the MOU should the regulatory requirements and resources be provided to allow us to participate in the requirements of the MOU. And Ms. Smiley, did I summarize that correctly?
Right, and to delegate to the executive officer working with the committee chair and council to wordsmith some of the things before we go to the legislature.
So does that answer your question, Mr. Pham? It's mostly that we can't sign something if we can't do it.
Okay. Yes, it did answer my question. And I guess at this point, the desire is to enter the MOU, but we just need to do our due diligence to make sure that we have the resources.
Well, we need to change the law too, regulations.
Okay.
I mean, excuse me, not law, regulation.
Right.
All right. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
All right, this is a moderator. I see no further requests for public comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Please do, thank you.
You're welcome.
So let's call for the vote. On the motion as it's stated, Jig Patel.
Yes.
Greg Lippy.
Yes.
Ricardo Sanchez. Thank you. Thank you. Debbie Veal.
Yes.
Albert Wong.
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. The motion passes. Thank you. I think at this time we've been meeting for a little bit. Let's take a break. I see the time is now 12:03. Let's get back together at 12:15. And so we'll take a little break. Thank you.
Chair Serpa, before we go on, this is Eileen. In the last vote on the FDA MOU, I did not hear whether Mr. Sanchez voted. I didn't hear a yay or nay.
That is
That was
correct.
a
We
yay.
didn't have a vote. Okay.
That would have been a yes. I thought I had said that.
He was too busy eating his donut.
No, those are the ones
Oh.
you eat.
I apologize for the delay in getting started here. I guess I'm having technological difficulties, but we are back on the record. Or actually, that's not the right thing to say for our committee, but we are being recorded. Let's do a roll call to assure that everyone's back. Jig Patel,
Here.
Greg Lippy,
Here.
Ricardo Sanchez,
Here.
Eddie Veal,
Here.
Albert Wong.
I'm here.
Great, thank you. Let's move on. The next item on the agenda is number 7, discussion and consideration of compounding with components other materials that could result in insanitary conditions as established in the FDA Insanitary Conditions at Compounding Facilities Guidance for Industry. Members, as you remember, we have discussed this topic several times over the course of the past few years, and again more recently in much detail at several meetings. I will not review all the background information that is detailed in the meeting materials, but will draw your attention to a few specific items. Most importantly, the various resources and sources of information that surround this topic. Further, I note that as the committee has requested, staff have discussed the issue with the FDA, who have confirmed that compounding from inappropriately graded products could result in violations of guidance documents regarding insanitary conditions. This would be consistent not only with the FDA's alerts highlighting concerns over using dietary grade ingredients, but also with the FDA's 483 reports that have been included in our prior meeting materials. Most recently, the NABP also confirmed that they share issues regarding inappropriately graded products with the state boards as they determine. As a part of its ongoing education on this issue, inspectors are continuing to discuss this practice with licensees when they encounter it during inspections or other audits. Educational efforts typically focus on the provisions of law, the importance of understanding the quality of ingredients prior to use, the importance of working with a supplier to improve the quality of bulk ingredients, just to name a few. I also note that in the meeting materials, we included several resources that may be provided to licensees as well during the educational discussions. Members, do you have any comments? I believe that we have discussed this issue in depth and that we should continue to ask staff to monitor the issue, and should there be any changes, they could bring it back to us as a committee. But I don't think that we have any additional action at this time. Members, do you have any comments? Okay, hearing none, let's go to public comment.
All right, this is Moderator. I will go ahead and turn on the Q&A panel. If anyone would like to make a comment, please type, "I would like to make a comment," using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, and submit it to all panelists. We are displaying instructions for your reference. All right, we have a Danny Martinez that would like to make a comment. Danny, you'll have 2 minutes. I'll give you a 10-second warning. And Danny, you've been unmuted.
Thank you very much. I did submit a letter to the committee on this topic. Unfortunately, it was not, you guys were not able to put this on the website, so I'm not sure if the committee members have a copy of this letter. I'm also not going to go through the background, much like Chairperson Serpa. We've rehashed that many times. What I want to do is really focus on two main ideas. Over the past several committee meetings, we've discussed this issue, specifically as it relates to methacobalamin. What I'd like the committee to consider is the theme of the past few meetings seems to center around concerns about impurities in these bulk ingredients. And so as a way to try and move the conversation forward, I'd like the committee to consider an approach where we evaluate whether or not additional testing for impurities in ingredients such as methacobalamin is necessary, so that a compounding pharmacist could essentially prove that no impurities would exist or harm a patient who needs this. The other issue, and this is probably the bigger one of the two, is that we understand that there's a desire by the board to educate pharmacies, but unfortunately, we don't know that we know that there's a lack of clarity or uncertainty around what exactly the pharmacy is being educated on. And the biggest example is pharmacies right now are being told that they're compounding with inappropriately graded ingredients. So in other words, they're not pharmaceutical grade, and that's the specific term that's been used. I would like the committee to consider establishing a definition of what pharmaceutical grade means. As the meeting materials do reflect, there is a definition for dietary supplement grade, and we
10 seconds.
With the board in the past that is an inappropriate grade for sterile compounding, but we would like you guys to consider a definition of pharmaceutical grade so that pharmacists know what they can compound. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. I think that, as we've stated in the past, the board is limited to follow the guidance and information that's provided to us by the FDA and now more recently by NABP, which, as I stated in my previous comments, are very specific on their use of inappropriately graded products. And the educational materials that we are providing during inspections are in the meeting materials also. And should you have specific questions, I would encourage the site or for yourself to reach out to our chief inspector to discuss the materials that are being handed out to licensees. Anne, did you have any other comments?
No, I don't.
Okay, thank you. Do we have other public comment?
We do. Our next one is from David Smith. And David, you've been unmuted.
Hi, I'm David Smith. I'm a pharmacist. And I'd like to say that last meeting, you've never had so much public comment. And whether it be a physician or patients. And I truly believe that the FDA knows how important methacobalamin is for patients. It's pretty specific. It's a small number. But those patients are now going to have to go out of state, and they are. And so now you're going to have compounding pharmacies shipping from out of state into California when we could be taking care of those patients here. And I really feel strongly that it's important to know that you got a mission statement about protecting the public, but there's also protecting access. And now those patients we can't be those pharmacists. And I know you're worried about this, but I truly believe the FDA, it's on their radar, but they know how important this drug is for many, many patients. And there's a lot of kids who have autism, and they're not going to Stanford or UCSF in that path. They're using nutrition, and methylcobalamin as a source to help repair their bodies.
10 seconds.
So I'm sorry for your decision.
Well, thank you, Mr. Smith. I think there's been an area of confusion there. The board has not stopped the use of using any dietary or other graded products for patient-specific compounding. That's not what the board has been discussing, and that's not what the FDA has been discussing. What we have discussed is that when we see inappropriately graded products being used in compounding, there is discussion with the pharmacy to assure that they have safe resources and testing to allow the use of that compounded product. It is not denying compounding or denying access to medication. If the pharmacy does not test the product or does not use a resource that has safe product, that's when it becomes an issue. But there's always ways of obtaining product that is either tested or found to be appropriately graded. So I just wanted to confirm that if you are finding access to the medications more difficult, it is only because we're providing education on how to adequately test and provide for good product. But we have not denied compounding with certain products so long as they are patient-specific and appropriately graded or tested to be shown to be safe. And that's following FDA guidelines. So the board is not doing anything more than what the FDA is advocating and enforcing. I'm not sure if anybody on board staff wants to comment more, but I'm very concerned about the perception that the board is putting up barriers, because I think we spent a lot of meeting time talking about access and how access can be obtained, because there are, and we agree, or I shouldn't say the board agrees, but individuals on the board, this committee, agree that patients require some of these medications, but it's up to the pharmacy to ensure that they're using safe ingredients. Staff or Anne, do you have any comments?
Thank you, Dr. Serpa. I would just echo what you said, consistent with the prior direction of the committee and the board. The board staff is focusing on education. There is a spectrum, and so there's education where education is appropriate. Not all cases are appropriate because of other risks to patients, but we are exercising the enforcement discretion as requested by the committee. I do believe that Supervising Inspector Acosta may be available should the committee have any more specific information about it.
Perhaps since this is a repeated theme, perhaps Chief Inspector or Supervising Inspector Acosta could be promoted so that she could speak to maybe some examples, not to give specifics on the sites, but to really, I would like to enforce to the members of the public that we do see the appropriate need for some products for specific patients, and there is a way to do it correctly with safe products. Is that possible? Is she available?
This is the moderator. She has been promoted.
Thank you. Christina Costa, thank you for joining us.
This is the moderator. I can go ahead and
Need to unmute.
Yes, there, she's been unmuted.
Oh, but I was saying amazing things. Just thank you, Maria, for bringing me in. It's kind of hard to give a general information about something that is so very site and product specific. We are definitely seeing people who have the ability to show us that they are looking at raw materials, specifically who is making them, how they're getting in, and then some of them the grade or something to give us inklings that their product would be appropriate. The other thing we are seeing is it being made for patients that would have an actual diagnosis that their body is unable to use a commercially available product, specifically that their body would have a disorder that would not allow them to activate or methylate the cobalamin, meaning cyanocobalamin would not be appropriate. That is exactly what compounding is for. What we generally see more is a pharmacy dispenses all a compounded preparation instead of the commercially available product. That is not necessarily appropriate in all indications, and so there is a difference between what would be appropriate use of this compounded preparation for an actual patient with the diagnosis of needing this specialty process, and then the general population using this compounded preparation. I know that it's very hard because each case is very individual, and what we are providing to each pharmacy is very individual as well. We have a list of references that our staff has been provided, all public information, some FDA, some USP, references on where they can look to see if their product may or may not be appropriate.
So, Dr. Acosta, just to be clear, if a pharmacy is compounding a product for a specific patient need, and they have all the documentation and testing to show that that API is safe, the board is not putting up any barriers to provide that medication to that patient, correct?
Correct. I mean, it's very hard to agree with the documentation to say the API is safe, but if we have documentation to show a particular patient needs this particular preparation, there is a much more ability for us to work with the location to fulfill the needs of that particular patient. But I have to tell you, that is probably less than 1% of the cases that we're looking at. Most of them, the provider is prescribing it to all of the patients, or the pharmacy is only providing it to all of the patients, and we don't have or are not be able to provide that it is for a particular patient what the particular disorder that requires this particular compounded preparation, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you. Board members, did you have any questions or comments on Mr. Smith's comment? Let's go on for additional public comment.
Maria, I think we should ask Mr. Smith if he understands what was stated.
Oh, good point. Is Mr. Smith still unmuted?
He is not, but I can go back and unmute him. So let me just find him in the queue. And David Smith, you've been unmuted.
Hello, hi. Well, I would like to, if I could, I do understand what Christina Costa, you have just explained. May my daughter and I call you and show you our patients? I mean, our formulas, we have done method suitability at a third-party lab for stability studies, and just for one prescriptions, or excuse me, for one formula that we've done, and we treat autism. And like the doctors that I just had on, those were my doctors that called in, and they're treating other metabolic disorders. And I don't carry cyanocobalamin, and these patients don't use cyanocobalamin. But I guess what I'm saying is I'd like to reach out and speak with you, and so that our source is one that's acceptable, and that we can serve our patients.
May I respond?
Is Christine still unmuted?
I'm here, Maria. May I respond?
Sure. Yes. Please.
Yeah. So, Mr. Smith, I'm happy to have a conversation with you, but I cannot provide consultation and how to tell you how to practice or how not to practice. I'm unfortunately on the other side as the regulator. I'm more than happy to have a call with you. You can get my information however Ann wants to provide it to you. I have no issues with that. But if you don't carry cyanocobalamin, my first question will be to you is, how do you know your patients can't use it?
This is Anne, and I apologize for interrupting, but I would strongly suggest that perhaps this conversation occur offline.
I would agree.
Yes. Thank you. So I believe Christine's contact information is on our website, or at least through the Ask an Inspector website. And if you have any challenges, Mr. Smith, do call the Board of Pharmacy, and I'm sure that we could get you in contact. Is that appropriate, Anne?
Yes, that's fine.
That's fine.
Okay, great. Let's move on for additional public comment.
Thank you. The next individual is Nancy Fingerhut. Nancy, you have been unmuted.
Thank you. Nancy Fingerhut, Compliance Officer and Quality Assurance Manager at Leesfieldsb Compounding Pharmacy. We're a 503A facility. I want to start off by acknowledging Mr. Martin's comments about a path forward. I appreciate those comments. I'd also like to thank the committee for supporting these critical discussions on drug quality and access to clinically necessary compounded medications, such as our previous discussion on methylcobalamin sterile injections. So we agree and support that quality should be built into drug production, and this is possible and legally required of 503A compounding pharmacies. So this involves quality control in the entire compounding process, including material selection up to the final product testing. So the final product testing I'm referring to comes from USP chapters 71, 85, and 232. These methods all address concerns for contamination, endotoxin, and elemental impurities. Our pharmacy is conducting tests to this nature on our sterile compounds, specifically methylcobalamin. And so we ask that this committee continue to consider the compounding process as a whole and final product testing in its review of quality standards. Because it seems like this discussion on the initial starting ingredient completely voids the total process and end product testing. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, the next comment is from Rachel Israel, and Rachel, you've been unmuted.
Thank you. Thank you to the board and the committee and the staff and all of the prescribers and pharmacists and attorneys like myself who have been involved in these discussions. I'm also from Leesfieldsb Compounding Pharmacy. We've been following these discussions very closely as we have a number of California patients that rely on our sterile methylcobalamin injections. I had a very quick question, which is if someone on the board could provide a little more information about the materials for licensees that have been referenced. I've reviewed all the materials that are online now, but it was sounding like there might be something additional that's being provided to licensees to provide more guidance. And if that's the case, if you could point us in the direction of that. And my second question relates to some references to an appropriately graded ingredient. And since we know in the context of methylcobalamin, there is no USP graded product ingredient, we're still having a lot of confusion about what appropriately graded might mean. And then finally, it looks like this is a little bit of a sideline to the discussion, but I have to say I have a great deal of concern about this board or any investigators determining whether a doctor's prescription for a compounded methylcobalamin product is appropriate based on the patient's diagnosis. And I don't understand why the investigator would be questioning the validity of the prescriber's determination that a compounded product is the right product for that patient. I think that really starts to infringe on the patient-doctor relationship, and it's not really a matter that goes to quality or safety that we've been talking about the last few weeks. Thanks you so much.
Thank you. I think the only part that we could respond to is the educational materials, and maybe Anne could speak to that, where that is available, that what educational materials are being shared with licensees. And regarding the last part of it, I could only suggest that you have those discussions with the FDA, and that's kind of where we're limited is in dealing with how FDA interprets and defines the process.
Specific to some of the specific to some of the educational resources, they are detailed in the chair report from the meeting materials, and then there's links to the various resources.
Oh, there it is. Okay. I was looking in the attachments also. So there are links within the chair report that are available to everyone. Thank you. And do we have other public comments?
This is the moderator, and that was the end of them. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Members, should you feel the need to discuss this further, we can continue to discuss it, but I would suggest at this point that we have no further action and continue with our current process of providing educational information to licensees and using enforcement discretion when situations arise.
I agree.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's move on to item number 8. Discussion and consideration of opportunities to improve naloxone accessibility through auxiliary labels for opioid prescriptions. The meeting materials detail the relevant laws and provide a link to drug safety communication issued by the FDA. This communication recommends that health professionals discuss the availability of naloxone. As you may recall, as part of the October 2020 meeting, members voted to agendize this discussion on auxiliary labels used to assist with naloxone accessibility, or the opportunity to use auxiliary labels to assist with naloxone accessibility. Members, I would like to open up the discussion to see from a policy perspective, should the board be considering any changes or any other actions to leverage the prescription dispensing encounter with patients and informing them about the availability of naloxone? Members, your thoughts?
Maria, this is Debbie. You know, I understand where the thought is coming from, but I guess I'm just not thinking an auxiliary label is going to change, is going to be helpful. And I don't know. I'm having a hard time embracing this. And I would welcome, you know, someone helping me understand you know, why this is a good idea.
Yeah, and just to remind the members, this was a public comment that was brought up by a member of the public suggesting additional educational opportunities for the public regarding the opioid prescriptions.
Well,
So
Maria, it's my understanding that when you take a medication, well, it's not my understanding because I actually had to do it. You go take a prescription to a pharmacy for an opioid. The pharmacist tells you at that time in the consultation that they have Naloxone or Narcan, I guess it's a brand name. And they tell you that, you know, all the reasons why you should consider getting it along with the opioid. I think that's far more beneficial than a label on a bottle. If the pharmacist is doing the consultation the way they're supposed to, and I think the majority of them are, people that are required to use opioids for some period of time will get that consultation and will understand that it's available. So I don't think that the label is necessary. I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea to have it there. However, It's one more thing to add to the bottle, along with all the other stickers that frankly a lot of people at this point ignore because there's just too much on the bottle.
Dr. Serpa, this is Albert. Yeah. I think Greg took that right out of my mouth. I think, like he said, if the pharmacy doing the job is to give consultation on those narcotics, that they should warn them about possible overdose and addiction. But I think ordinary prescription, you don't worry about overdose. But those people on the chronic use, if they come and refill every month, they get a high quantity every month. Those are the patients you need to consult and warn them about the possible naloxone. But other than that, I don't think extra label will be necessary. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Serpa, this is Jig. I concur. And also, I feel that, if we want to have that naloxone for individuals that are getting high morphine equivalents, then something that we can discuss as a board, as a committee, is to have mandatory dispensing of naloxone with, let's say, 100 MME or 120 MME total dispensing for any particular patient. I think that would help more than having it on auxiliary label.
Any other member comments? Okay, let's open up for public comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. All right, the question and answer panel is now available. If anyone would like to make a comment, please type, "I would like to make a comment," and submit it to all panelists. We are displaying instructions. All right, we have a Stephen Gray that would like to make a comment. So Stephen, I'll let you know when you're unmuted and you will have 2 minutes. Stephen, you've been unmuted.
Thank you very much. As the title of this agenda item says, the interest is to improve naloxone accessibility. The main problem with naloxone accessibility is that the protocols that pharmacy has to follow in order to furnish it without a prescription are much too complicated and time-consuming in relation to what other practitioners are able to do. In the organization I used to belong to, the physicians were excited about having pharmacy provide the naloxone, but it took too much time and distracted from the duties of other patients to go through the required protocol that was agreed to by the medical board and the pharmacy board. They basically responded back to the physician, "You don't have to go through that. These products are really needed," and many experts say they should literally be OTC. And in fact, now, since that protocol was developed, there is an amazing number of other types of individuals that can provide naloxone. These are not practitioners. They're everything from librarians to teachers to others without going through that. I recommend that the board use AB 1533 to revise BPC 4052.01 and the regulations to simplify the process. Then many more pharmacies would be willing and able to provide the naloxone that is so desperately needed out there and to be more prevalent and to save more lives. So please consider, and this is urgent because the opioid epidemic has increased during the pandemic for COVID.
10 seconds.
Decreased. So please consider this modification to 1533. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gray.
All right, our next request for public comment is from Lori Walmsley. And Lori, I'll let you know when you've been unmuted. All right, Lori, you have been unmuted.
Thank you, Moderator. Chair Sherpa, members of the board, Lori Wamsley on behalf of Walgreens. Very much appreciate the conversation today regarding the auxiliary labels and agree with many of the comments that you've already stated. The real estate on our prescription vials is definitely limited, especially given the number of other labeling requirements that California has, whether it be the 12-point font, the already present opioid sticker, warning patients that it is an opioid, or the dizziness and drowsiness warnings. The addition of this, I don't think, would really provide a substantive benefit to the patient, and in some cases would cause us to have to use larger vials just to put these stickers on. I also agree with the fact that counseling is already occurring for these types of products, and that is a far more beneficial way to encourage consumers to get the naloxone products. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, this is a moderator. I see no further requests for public comment. Would you like me to close the Q&A panel?
Please do.
Okay, it's closed.
So members, at this time we have no action on this, but hearing public comment, should members have a preference to perhaps look at the naloxone dispensing or furnishing language and
protocols. Yeah, I would like to add that to a future agenda discussion on that.
But I'm wondering if that should go to a different committee, members or staff. If we were to look at naloxone furnishing protocols, would that be under the purview of enforcement and compounding or a different committee?
I think it's enforcement. What do you think, Ann?
It might also fit well with licensing committee.
Okay, it's probably a toss-up.
So
it's up to you, Maria.
Okay, well, let's do some more investigation and add it to a future agenda for our committee to see if, as Dr. Gray suggests, that it really is some sort of legislative or regulatory change after we do some investigation. How does that sound?
Sounds good to me. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay with me.
Thank you all. Thank you. Any other comments before we move on to the next agenda item? Number 9, discussion and consideration of Assembly Bill 2789, Healthcare Practitioners, Prescriptions, Electronic Data Transmission. As included in the meeting materials, in 2018, legislation was passed to facilitate e-prescribing. This legislation included a delayed effective date to allow a period for implementation and transition. The provisions now take effect January 1st, 2022. It approves that it is now appropriate time to discuss any changes and determine if we should develop some sort of FAQ. Provisions of the legislation are detailed in the meeting materials, so I'm not going to read them, but I will note that there are a number of exceptions to the requirement of e-prescribing. I believe it's also important to note that the pharmacist who receives a written, oral, or fax prescription is not required to verify that the prescription falls into the exception. Members, do you have any questions or comments on the requirements that could be used to develop some educational materials? Before we start the comment, I do want to share one area that I think that we could define in the educational materials that come up in some outside discussions, and that has to deal with the practice of prescribing and dispensing medications within a single EHR platform. If a single EHR platform is used for both the prescribing and the dispensing, does that fall into the definition of electronic transmission? Or does this electronic transmission, which is all over the regulations, solely provide for sending a prescription electronically from one electronic service to another at an outside pharmacy. Members, do you have any other comments or ideas?
You know, Maria, I have just one thought, and I'm kind of looking at Mr. Sanchez, Ricardo Sanchez. Is he chairs the Communication Education Committee?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that again?
I said I was just thinking that the Public Ed and Communication Committee might also be a good place for, you know, since we're really kind of focusing on education, that might be a good place, or maybe Mr. Sanchez has some ideas on ways that we could reach out to the prescribers, you know, to educate around the, and pharmacies, I guess, for that matter too, around the education of this this change.
I would say we could inquire with staff what's available to us to get out to them, and gather some, you know, input to share with the committee and the board.
So is that the preference, to have the FAQs be developed in the Education and Communication Committee?
I was thinking not only the FAQs, but which I think are very important, but also maybe like a more of a like campaign approach where the FAQs would be one piece of it. That's just my thought.
Yeah, I'm open for you know, exploring whatever you guys want on it. Obviously, I'll need staff's help in coming up with some ideas, but yeah, we can explore that.
So Debbie, did you want to, or Ricardo, include that in some sort of a motion?
Well, I'll let Debbie do it since she brought it up. I mean, I'm okay with it.
Well, and I'm interested in what other committee members.
Yeah, Debbie, and it's only because you're being specific on it, so I wanted to, you know, let you, you know, put the motion on if you want it like that.
Yeah.
This is Anne.
Yeah.
I apologize for interrupting. If you would like to transfer this issue, I don't know that a motion is necessary. We're taking notes, and we can just incorporate it, work with Chair Sanchez to incorporate it into a future agenda if that works. I mean, you're welcome to take a motion, but I don't know that what's necessary for this.
Agreed.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, we're just gonna explore it.
Go ahead, Debbie.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, you know, I'm curious if other members of this committee are in agreement. I'm not trying to just kind of push it off. I just think that, I mean, that is kind of the focus at this point of that committee, and you know, perhaps it's a better place for the education outreach to occur. But definitely, we want to do FAQs. Just a suggestion that maybe there's more than just FAQs we need to do.
I agree with you.
Okay.
Okay,
Well, then,
any other member
well,
comment?
then
Otherwise,
we'll take.
I'm sorry, who's talking?
I was gonna say this is Ricardo. I was gonna say,
You're
well,
breaking
then
up.
we'll just take it up there. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
This audible is coming out pretty broken up on your guys' end too, but let's see what we can have some suggestions.
Okay. Let's go on to public comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will go ahead and open up the Q&A panel. So if any member of the public would like to make a comment, please type "I would like to make a comment" using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and submit it to all panelists. We are displaying instructions. All right, we have an individual identified as Teresa Liston Crane that would like to make a comment. Teresa, I'll let you know when you've been unmuted. You'll have 2 minutes. I'll give you a 10-second warning. All right, Teresa, you have been unmuted.
Good afternoon. I just wanted to make a comment on the question raised about the definition of the electronic transcription within a single EHR platform. I recognize the committee is going to ask the Communication and Education Committee to work on the FAQs, but does the committee that's present or any members have any comment regarding that interpretation or definition, or are you going to leave it to the Education Committee to help define that and communicate it?
I'm not sure, Anne or Ms. Smiley, do you have a comment on the definition of electronic transmission?
It's one of the challenges that we have in the hospital setting as being, a single system, or if we're transmitting to ourselves to dispense a discharge type prescription is the scenario that we have this come up in, and whether that falls under and meets that requirement or qualification as an electronic transmission versus from an inpatient to an outpatient source, a completely different server or system.
I think that's And do you want to go, or do you want me?
No, go ahead, Eileen.
Sure. The way it's defined in the statute in 404.0.5 makes it seem, just as Dr. Serpa had said, that it requires a transmission from one entity to another. I don't think that was something that was contemplated. We also need to look at DEA rules with respect to controlled substances, because obviously the intent of some of these rules was to improve security over controlled substances. So there's a lot of things that we need to work at. And just as an informational matter, just as we worked on facts with that were released last fall when we were transitioning to the new prescription forms with the serial number, we worked with DCA, also with Medical Board and some of the other affected agencies to make sure we're on the same page. So it will take some work with staff, but I think we need to address that, but we need to look at it in conjunction with the DEA rules.
Great, thank you. So more to come.
Thank you.
All right, our next comment is from Stephen Gray. And Stephen, you've been unmuted.
Thank you very much. I completely agree that there needs to be some real study and FAQs developed, and it really needs to dig deep into this. The statute itself is unfortunately rather ambiguous. For an example, it says that all pharmacies must have the capability of receiving electronic prescriptions, but it doesn't say that all pharmacies must have the capability of receiving controlled substance electronic prescriptions. That would be under the DEA rules. California law does not require non-controlled substance prescriptions to be transmitted electronically by the DEA rules. And in fact, many prescribers who don't use that don't prescribe controlled substances for their patients have not adopted the DEA validated systems. Likewise, there are pharmacies that do not handle controlled substances, and the FAQs need to recognize that so that they are not confused. The systems are expensive. The systems are expensive to maintain, and so forth. Also, the statute requires that a pharmacy must transmit or transfer the prescription, which might be a controlled substance, to another pharmacy, but it doesn't say how to do that. Does it have to be electronically transferred? Pharmacies have systems that receive electronic prescriptions, including controlled substance, but pharmacists are not allowed under the DEA rules to have systems that can issue or transmit a controlled substance prescription. So there is considerable research that needs to be done. These are FAQs that will come up as we get closer. It may be that the
10
board
seconds.
will need to actually extend the time for compliance. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you,
I see
Dr.
no.
You bring up some good points.
So this is the moderator, and I see no further requests for public comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so it sounds like there is appropriate information for staff and council to research the issues identified and develop FAQ for them to review at the Education and Communication Committee before the January 1st deadline. And should the deadline, or should investigations determine that there are issues and the deadline needs to be addressed, staff should bring that to the attention of the full board. Who should that attention go to, Dan?
Sorry, the unmute was eluding me. I think that since it's going to be since the issue is going to be transferred to communication and public education, it's generally easier to keep the policy in one committee. So I'd recommend that we bring it to them.
Okay, great, thank you. Next item, number 10, discussion and consideration of the FDA's final rule relating to the importation of certain Canadian prescription drugs. As included in the meeting materials, last year the FDA finalized its rule to implement provisions of federal law that allow for the importation of certain prescriptions from Canada. Today we will receive a brief presentation on the requirements from Anne. It's my understanding that there is pending legislation in California to implement those provisions. However, the measure is a 2-year bill. I would recommend that we refrain from speaking about the California pending legislation specifically and keep our discussion to the federal law and board policy. Anne, I believe you have some slides.
I do. And so I want to start out by saying that the rule is pretty dense. So this really is just kind of like a high level introduction into the topic so that we kind of have a general sense of the framework of how it would all look. And so that's really what we're going to kind of be talking about today. So last year, it was late last year, the final rule was issued to implement the provisions of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act that allow importation of certain prescriptions from Canada. The rule became effective November 30th. And as stated in the executive summary of the rule, the purpose of the final rule is to achieve a significant reduction in the cost of covered products while posing no additional risk to public health and safety. So today, like I said, I'm going to just quickly review some of the basic framework. So the next slide, please. So under the final rule, Section 804 of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, it's going to be implemented through, as written, time-limited Section 804 importation programs, and they're called SIPs, which will be authorized by the FDA, but then they're managed by the sponsors of the program. In certain circumstances, there may be co-sponsors. It gets a little detailed. But so the SIP, so the program sponsor that's typically a state or an Indian tribe can also co-sponsor with an Indian tribe, a pharmacist, or a wholesale distributor. The board is aware, I'm aware of at least 2 states that have actively began implementing the provisions of the federal rule, Colorado being one. Next slide, please. So under the process, an SIP proposal is submitted. And so under the provisions of the rule, the program sponsor must specify the eligible prescription drugs that will be included in the program. For a drug to be eligible, it must be approved by the Government of Canada's Health Canada Health Products and Food Branch, and it needs to otherwise meet the conditions of an FDA-approved drug application or an abbreviated new drug application. So essentially, eligible drugs are those that could be sold legally in either the Canadian market or the American market if it had appropriate labeling. There's also exceptions to what can be included in an eligible drug. There's quite a list, but included in that is controlled substances, biologics, IV injectable drugs, drugs that are inhaled during surgery. None of those can be included or are precluded from being included as eligible drugs. So further, the rule also requires the SIP proposal to identify the foreign seller in Canada that will purchase the eligible prescription drugs directly from its manufacturer, and the importer in the U.S. that will buy the drugs directly from the foreign seller. So it's a very closed market. So as you can see in the slide, the foreign seller has to be licensed in Canada and also registered with the FDA as a foreign seller. In addition, the importer must be a licensed wholesaler or pharmacy in the U.S. The SIP proposal is limited to one foreign seller and one importer. The foreign seller and the importer are subject to supply chain security requirements established in the rule. This includes that the foreign seller affixes or imprints an alphanumeric serial number on each package and case of the drug. The importer is required to confirm that product identifier meets the federal requirements. The supply chain is limited to 3 entities: the manufacturer, the Canadian manufacturer, 1 foreign seller, and 1 importer. Next slide, please. So after the FDA has approved an SIP proposal, the importer must submit a pre-import request to the FDA at least 30 days prior to the scheduled arrival of a shipment. Arrival of a shipment is limited to U.S. Customs and Border Protection ports of entry authorized by the FDA. An importer or authorized custom broker must file an entry for each eligible drug imported. And under the rule, there are very specific reporting requirements. Next slide, please. One item that I wanted to speak about was testing of the product. So testing must be conducted by either the manufacturer or the importer for authenticity, degradation, and to ensure the drugs are in compliance with established specifications and standards. If testing is not performed by the manufacturer, the importer must arrange for testing with a qualifying U.S. lab and must ensure that the drug complies with all of the labeling requirements. In such cases, the manufacturer is required to supply the necessary information to confirm that its labeling complies with the federal requirements. Manufacturers must also provide the importer with the protocols that are necessary to support the required testing, including a validated stability indicating assay so the drug can be tested for degradation. Testing will be subject to review and acceptance by the FDA, and the drug will need to be relabeled consistent with FDA requirements prior to distribution. Next slide, please. So each sponsor is required as part of the proposal to provide the FDA with data and information, including the SIPs, so the importation programs, cost savings to consumers. Importers are required to submit adverse events, field alerts, and other reports to the drug's manufacturer and to the FDA. And if the FDA or any of the participants in the importation program determine that a recall is warranted, the importation program sponsor is responsible for effectuating the recall. The program sponsor is required to have a written recall plan that distributes the procedures, that describes the procedures to perform a recall, including specifying who is responsible for performing those procedures. So my last slide, and like I said, it's a very high level, but my last slide is an example of the Colorado program. If you could switch to that next slide, please. Thank you. And so it kind of just shows a very high level flow of what it could potentially look like. And of course, this is the Colorado program, but I felt like it kind of gives a nice visual of how the process from a 50,000 foot view could work. And that's my presentation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Anne. Members, do you have any comments or feedback to provide? What do you think we should do about future discussions? I'm sorry, go ahead, Albert.
And is this mainly for the wholesaler, not in the, it's too much hassle for the individual pharmacy to order them, right?
So the distribution, Albert, is not, at least for me, like I didn't find it super well defined. So from a basic concept, right? The state, there'll be a program sponsor that in the California solution, right? There you've got your program sponsor. They develop everything, right? All of the rules of the road compliant with the federal program. But they also have to identify the manufacturer, the foreign seller, right? And then the importer. That importer could be as I understand the rule, Albert, I believe it could be a pharmacy, but that pharmacy would have to be licensed as a wholesaler, I believe. But so it could be, but I'm not quite sure that that's feasible.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
So members, do you have any comments about how we should proceed for future discussions on this? Shall we just wait for staff to apprise us of any changes?
Yeah, I feel like it's something we kind of need to just monitor versus take action right now.
Agreed.
Yeah, I agree.
So let's go to public comment.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. All right, if a member of the public would like to make a comment, please type "I would like to make a comment" using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and submit it to all panelists. We are displaying instructions for your reference. And we have a Shabir Safdar who would like to make a comment. So Shabir, I'll let you know when you have been unmuted. And Shabir, you've been unmuted.
Excellent. Madam Chair, members of the committee, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
thank you.
yes.
I'll be very brief, and I'll see if I can avoid even running to the 2 minutes. So my organization, the Partnership for Safe Medicine, studies the supply chain and security of the supply chain, and we have studied and are following the implementation attempts of other states in this area. And while I could talk to you at great length about the problems with those, including the problem with drug shortages in Canada and the lack of any track and trace program in that country, which means that any medicine attempted from import from there would be less secure, I would really urge the board to consult with their peers and colleagues in Canada before moving forward with this. The Canadian Pharmacists Association, the Canadian Society of Hospital Pharmacists, many patient groups, and CAPDM, which is the equivalent of the Healthcare Distribution Association in Canada, which is the Wholesalers of Canada, are all categorically against this because they struggle with significant drug shortages today because they don't really make most of their own product. And they're terrified that a country 9 times the size of Canada may begin doing bulk imports out of their drug supply. So there's a lot to talk about with these issues. I actually study them a great deal, and I'd be happy to talk at more length with the board, but I would just urge you before taking any action to consult with any of the Canadian peers of yours, including NAPRA up in Canada, about what they think about this program, because they're not happy. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
All right. I see no further requests for public comment. Would you like me to close the Q&A panel?
Please do. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So we will not take any action on this item, but monitor for ongoing communication.
Dr. Serper, I'd like to make a comment.
Sure, Dr. Wong.
Yeah, you know, as President Biden said, you know, he want to bring more manufacturer back to the United States. If Canada could make money manufacture over there, I don't see any reason why America cannot make their own product and bring the business back home and manufacture in U.S. That's my comment.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Wong. We'll move on to next agenda item number 11. Office of Attorney General presentation on the annual report to the legislature. I'd like to thank Mr. Carlson for his patience with this long agenda and afternoon. I appreciate you hanging in with us. I'd like to introduce him, Carlson, who is the Senior Assistant Attorney General with the Licensing Section of California Department of Justice. He has a presentation for us.
Thank you very much, Executive Officer Sodergren and members of the Enforcement Committee. Again, my name is Carl Sani. I'm the Senior Assistant Attorney General of the Licensing Section. And you may know that licensing is the section within the Department of Justice that is charged with enforcing the Board of Pharmacy's disciplinary cases. Licensing is comprised of over 120 attorneys and paralegals, and we work in 5 offices across the state. And while most of our cases are heard in the Office of Administrative Hearings as the initial forum, we frequently find ourselves in Superior Court, both in criminal and in civil courts, as well as appellate courts, and including the California Supreme Court. And we have also litigated cases for the Board of Pharmacy, most recently in the Federal District Court and in appellate courts in the Ninth Circuit as well. Next slide. So in my presentation today, what I'd like to do is spend a few moments telling you a little bit about the background of the report that I'll be giving to you, and then the data collection process, which is to give you an idea of the work that goes into compiling the information. And then I will give you an overview of the data that pertains to all Department of Consumer Affairs clients. And then finally, and I'm sure most importantly, I will focus on the data for the Board of Pharmacy. As you know, and as your presence here indicates, the Board of Pharmacy has a very sophisticated and very robust enforcement system. And it is really a pleasure for our office to work with the staff of the Board of Pharmacy. It's just a delight that has been reported to me over and over again about how much they enjoy working with the personnel and dealing with the very considered and carefully reasoned investigative materials that are presented to us, and just the high amount of discipline that the office exhibits. The report today is on this Business and Professions Code 312.2 report. And the Office of Attorney General just issued its most recent report on January 1st of this year that covers the period of the fiscal year from 2019 to 2020. The origin, go to next slide, please. The origin of this report goes back to 2015 when Senate Bill 467 was passed. It was passed to help provide a series of metrics to the state and legislators and to all that would focus on the time periods that govern the disposition of disciplinary cases. Historically, going back a few years earlier, there was a Consumer Protection Enforcement Initiative, I think back to roughly about 2012, that encouraged agencies to try to get cases resolved in 36 months and move it down to about 18 months. And the report that we file each year is intended to provide data that can be used. Now, one of the obvious effects of this is while the purpose of the report is to identify trends, you need a number of years. So we're still really at the beginning stages of this. The first 312.2, the statute 312.2 became effective in 2016, and the first annual report was done in January of 2018. But the second report was the first report where we synchronized our data and methodology with the Health Quality Enforcement section that also represents several agencies within the Department of Consumer Affairs. That way, all the metrics, the numbers that we report, are similarly derived and are consistently evaluated and can be compared, from agency to agency. The fourth report, as indicated, was just published on January 1, and it comprised data for 36 agencies and includes licensing client agencies, which are about 24 agencies, and health quality enforcement client agencies within the Department of Consumer Affairs, a little over a half dozen agencies, including the medical board. Next slide, please. So all this data that is being reported is collected through our computer system called our case management system, or CMS for short. And CMS has roughly 200 ProLaw users. I should indicate ProLaw is the other piece of software that we use to manage our cases, and the data from ProLaw goes into our case management system. So there are roughly 200 ProLaw users when you combine health quality enforcement with licensing. And each case that we handle for all of our agencies and for the Board of Pharmacy are open and tracked within this ProLaw system. And all the users enter data as the case proceeds. That includes, we call them milestones, but they are just certain events that happen during the course of handling a disciplinary case. That includes, for example, the date when the case is referred to us, the date the matter is filed, the date when the hearing takes place, the date when the case is submitted, and the date when the case is ultimately resolved by the client agency. And then during the course of the year, we have a group of paralegals that go through and audit and validate this data. So that requires them to carefully look at each matter to make sure that the data has been properly entered and entered in a way that's consistent with our system to ensure that the data is consistently reported from matter to matter. Next slide. So if you look at all agencies within the Department of Consumer Affairs, including the health quality enforcement agencies, what does it show? Well, on accusations, it shows that roughly 52% of the referrals that come to us are accusation cases of the total of 3,964 for 2018-19 and 3,530 for 19-20. And that number is pretty consistent. And this report, by the way, only focuses on accusation matters. It shows a rejection percentage varying from 3 to 5%. Again, it shows a 2% increase. And my take is that is not really too suggestive of anything. Matters happen, such as laws can change, and the change of a law that we recently have can affect how matters that when they finally come to us are no longer consistent with applicable law, for example, that changed from the time when the agency sent it to us. Further investigations, they'll show a marginal increase up. Again, there's not a lot to read between a couple years in this data from my perspective. It does show a 2% increase, but we consider further investigation as a great tool to ensure that the client gets its most current information that it has available to it to us so that we can file an accusation. So to illustrate, if a client sends us a matter and it involves conduct that gets identified, but as we proceed to prepare the accusation, there's further misconduct that may occur, then it may be returned back to the agency for them at their own request to supplement their investigative material to include the most recent facts to support an accusation. This shows then also a decrease in adjudications from 2018-19 to 2019-20, about a 14% decrease. I can't speak and tell you exactly why that has occurred, but I can point out something that we're all very much aware of, which is the COVID pandemic officially started, if you will, when the governor issued his orders in mid-March of last year. And that means that effectively for the last quarter, even a little over the last quarter, there was a a disruptive effect on all state agencies as they adapted to a new type of environment, a telework environment. And for example, the Office of Administrative Hearings, which hears our cases, was put in a difficult position to adapt itself to handle administrative cases, something that was facilitated by subsequent orders from the governor, so that we could have telephonic hearings initially, and then video conference hearings. And then after video conference hearings were underway, further improvements in virtual hearings were undertaken by the Office of Administrative Hearings. Much to their credit, they became some of the foremost users of a piece of software called Case Lines that allows electronic exhibits to be uploaded by the litigants directly to the Office of Administrative Hearings. And so the Office of Administrative Hearings has worked very effectively to adapt to very difficult situations. But that means, of course, that first quarter, not a lot of cases were heard, and therefore not a lot of cases were adjudicated, which may have contributed to this decrease. Next slide, please. This is reporting the accusations referred to the Attorney General, and it shows a general increase of 8%, which is really quite impressive in light of the COVID environment. Next slide. And again, this is now data specific to the Board of Pharmacy. And if you look at this, this shows an increase in further investigation requested. But what you have to bear in mind is that this increase of 85% is really only 11 additional matters, and out of 372, and in light of changes in the law, I don't view that as being too suggestive really of anything that you can draw some hard conclusions from. Next slide, please. Now this slide shows the accusations filed by the Board of Pharmacy, and it shows a decrease. And again, one of the most challenging things during this period is identifying causes, and I really can't speak to causes other than to notice the, if you will, the 800-pound gorilla in the room, which is the impact of COVID and the disruptive effect it has throughout California and California's economy. Next slide. This shows the accusations withdrawn and the accusation matters adjudicated. And again, the accusations withdrawn are nominal. Accusations withdrawn mean that the agency determined that it no longer wanted to proceed with the accusation. That can happen for a variety of reasons. Certainly one thing is mitigation or other evidence can be received. Sometimes, and we see this, respondents, license holders literally die during the course of the proceeding, at which point the matters are withdrawn. So only one this year, and I guess you can say that's good data, but it's, again, not very meaningful in the light of the total picture of cases done. Accusation matters adjudicated, though, we did see a decrease. And again, the only conclusion I can suggest may be at the root of this is the fact that the Office of Administrative Hearings, which adjudicates our cases initially, was largely, shut down. The only cases they were hearing initially during the first few weeks were cases where both parties agreed to hear cases, and there was no objections to proceeding usually by telephone. So on some very simple matters, some cases were adjudicated, but that was a disruptive effect, which we now see getting, resolved. Next slide. This shows accusations received to accusation filed. It's a date frame. You should say accusation matters received from the client to the time when it's filed. And this shows a decrease. And, there are several factors, I mean, initially this could look a little bit disappointing, but if you looked at your handout that contains the actual data, I think if you have the PDF form of your report on page 117, it actually shows the page from the Board of Pharmacy. And what I didn't put in this graph, just to maintain the same presentation I give to other agencies, is it shows that the median value is not 214, that's the average value, but the median value is 138. So that's the midpoint value where 50% of the cases have a longer period of time to adjudicate and 50% have a shorter period of time to, from filing to adjudication. So these factors make a difference. This is indicative of the fact that a lot of the Board of Pharmacy's most complex and sophisticated cases simply take more time to work through. But on a median value, the board seems to be doing, quite well. Next slide. This shows the time from accusations filed to settlement. It shows an increase of 368 days. And again, the big, unknown issue is to what degree COVID has impacted this. We will be monitoring this, and we do monitor this internally. And I believe that as time passes, these types of numbers will revert and normalize to some extent. Finally, if you look at accusations filed to default, it shows a nominal decrease. And if that makes sense, if you think about it, because defaults, for example, don't require the intervention of the Office of Administrative Hearings in most cases, except for cases where people don't appear for hearings. But standard defaults where no notice of defense is filed, those do not go to the Office of Administrative Hearings, and they get processed by the board itself. And that shows, again, that there's been no disruption. So that, again, is something that I think suggests the dynamic impact of COVID. Next slide. This shows accusation filed to hearing requested, and it shows a nominal increase, but it's pretty nominal because it does not take our office, regardless of the status of the Office of Administrative Hearings, we're able to file our request. But from the date the hearing is received, the hearing commenced, again, good values. And the total figure shows that accusation filed to hearing commenced is actually okay. It's an improvement over the prior reporting period. So what does this all mean? Well, as indicated before, if you go to the next slide, it shows that we are in the process of measurement. And now we have basically 4 values, 4 reporting periods. And as time progresses, we hope to see certain trends manifested, certain improvements achieved. And we can then also identify those areas that are areas that we can make further improvement in. And so this is a very effective metric to making public the work that the board and the work of our office jointly do to further consumer protection and to expedite hearings. But it will take more time for us to actually draw trends that we can deduce some conclusions from. Some cases require more time. And the reality is that when you have a board with as sophisticated a set of licensees and laws as the Board of Pharmacy, sometimes cases take longer to investigate. And there is a greater need for careful expert review. Complexity takes time. And then when you're dealing with sophisticated clients on the other side as licensees, they frequently invoke their right to counsel, and they retain counsel. And when counsel gets involved, they often, I would like to say they ensure that due process is achieved, but they also ensure oftentimes that the process takes maybe a little bit longer than it might otherwise take. As you imagine, they engage in more discovery and more interchange. But ultimately, we are striving to adjudicate the board's cases as expeditiously as possible. And we've been very impressed and pleased with the work of the Board of Pharmacy staff in working through issues on given cases, working through issues on protocols, all to achieve the best result for the public and for the licensees who are entitled, as we all know, to due process. With that said, I would open it up to any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Sunny, for your presentation. Members, do you have any questions?
No, I appreciate the presentation. That was very good.
Thank you.
Well, let's open up for public comment.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. All right, if a member of the public would like to make a comment, please type "I would like to make a comment" using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and submit your request to all panelists. We are displaying instructions. This is the moderator. I see no request for public comment at this time. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Please do. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Again, thank you, Mr. Sunny, for your presentation. It was very informative and detailed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Before we go on to the next item on the agenda, I wanted to ask the members if they would like a break. It's been a little while, it's an hour and a half since our last break. What's your preference?
Yeah, that would work.
Yeah, 10 minutes.
Yeah, let's take a 10-minute break and resume just a few minutes before 4. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Let's take a roll call to see if everyone's back. Dick Patel.
I'm here.
Greg Whitby.
Here.
Ricardo Sanchez.
Here.
Ricardo. Thank you. Debbie
Here.
Beal.
Here.
Albert Wong. Albert. I'm sure he'll join us in just a minute and announce himself. Okay, let's go on to the next agenda item, number 12. Discussion and consideration of proposal to develop an alternative enforcement model. Members, the chair report details out relevant provisions in the law. As you may recall, in July 2020, we received a presentation on the administrative case process. As was shared at that presentation, the administrative case process has 2 fundamental guiding principles: due process of the respondent and public protection. As Deputy Attorney General Jarvis reminded us, the state has the duty and the responsibility to assure a licensee is competent and trustworthy. We have also continued our discussion on what, if any, action we should take on an alternative enforcement model. During our last meeting, we directed staff to develop recommendations to achieve our policy goals, to reduce case resolution times, and to reduce associated costs that would not require statutory changes. Included in the meeting materials is a pre-accusation conference that is used by the Board of Accountancy. Also included is a model used by the Department of Managed Healthcare that appears as a part of its process to include the same type of pre-pleading settlement. However, do note that transitioning to a full model such as used by the Department of Managed Healthcare would still require statutory changes. Members of the public were advised to contact the executive officer is interested in providing a presentation to our committee during the meeting today. It is my understanding that there were no requests received by the April 14th deadline. In addition, we received no written comments to be submitted to the board prior to the April 19th requested deadline. Members, I recommend that we consider the pre-pleading conference briefly described as a starting point to our discussion today. That's the one by the Board of Accountancy. It's included in the meeting materials, and also included in the meeting materials was, again, a stepwise approach of discussing policy questions. And I think we should use the same process that we used in the past agenda items to review each question one at a time. After I share my opinion, I'll ask members for their thoughts. And after we go through each question, we will open up the discussion to public comments on all the questions. So let's go to the next slide. Moderator, can you, oh, thank you. So we have quite a few questions to consider, and if we go through them in a methodical way, I think it will help us with our considerations. First, is this proposed change consistent with the board's consumer protection mandate? That's, again, we're talking about using some sort of pre-pleading agreement very similar to the Board of Accountancy. So in looking at that process, I believe the answer is yes, and would appreciate other members' comments.
Yeah, Dr. Serper, I'm back.
Thank you, Albert. We're reviewing some policy considerations with an alternative enforcement model. The first one is, would a pre-pleading conference similar to that used by the Board of Accountancy be consistent with the board's consumer protection mandate?
You know, Maria, this is Debbie. I actually think that this is potentially the answer to what we've been wrestling with for these past months or year. I think that this is close to what the stakeholders, you know, the testimony that we've heard, and I think that it, I don't think it's a bad thing to public safety, and I think it does move cases along so that maybe cases that that are more I don't know, like, what's the right word, that have a potential to be, you know, a bigger problem for public safety, maybe we would have more time to focus on those. So this could kind of get, you know, kind of move things along. So at this point, I think I would be in support of seriously looking at this pre-accusation review conference.
I agree.
Do you think that there should be some cases that would be exempt from this, that we should only have?
Yeah, absolutely.
We have to consider as we discuss this further.
Yeah.
Okay. The third question is, does it provide an appropriate balance of consumer protection and due process? I think we kind of talked about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think so.
Do you think it would increase or decrease case resolution time?
I think it would improve it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it would decrease the time.
Great for that. What do you think the impacts on costs would be? I think there might be some great cost savings should someone decide to go through that process.
I would think so, especially, I mean, if it decreases processing time, I think it would decrease cost. I guess my question is, bandwidth-wise, does it change? I think it shifts things. So does it shift costs more towards, you know, our Board of Pharmacy staff? Is this going to put a larger burden on them? Is that something we need to take in consideration?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the change would be appreciable.
Could we ask our executive officer what her opinion is?
Sure.
Yeah,
Hi, yeah, this is
Dan.
Ann. I do believe that it's going to result in a decrease in cost because we're going to be, it's kind of, it's switching some of the work to the front end. Mr. Sony, I believe, is still on the line, and he does have some experience with, working the pre-settlement conference with the accountancy board. He may have a sense of the potential for decrease in cost, but some of the easy things to identify is, hearing prep time, hearings, all of those kinds of things would automatically be going away if you're able to reach a settlement through this pre-pleading conference.
Yes.
Is Mr. Sony muted?
Yes, this is Carl Sani. I don't think I can speak appropriately to the issue of costs without getting into another agency's, cost issues. But what I would say is that our office gets involved, at the final points of the investigation, and we meet with those respondents whom the board selects for us to meet with, and we show them a draft of the accusation, and it becomes a point of great value because we get feedback to licensees who want to meet with us. We don't compel them, at least the Board of Accountancy does not compel them to appear. But for those who want to work to understand, to clarify, to provide additional information to the board, it then provides a mechanism after they have had a chance to look at the draft accusation. Often they're the ones who raise the issue of resolving the case. Just so you understand, the actual settlement is not before the filing of an accusation, which can't be done under California law, but the accusation can be followed immediately thereafter with a notice of defense and a stipulated settlement in literally days. So it can take, as someone commented, it can kind of front end the timeframes for doing this. So it does have that benefit. And I've participated in many, and it's a tool that works, from what I understand, to everyone's benefit. Licensees like it, and they get to meet with the agency, and the agency gets to, indicate what it has identified as grounds for an accusation. The licensee can offer additional information that may change the accusation's allegations. And after that conference is complete, the parties, if everyone is willing, can work through a settlement. And that is, in my experience, I will say not uncommon, once everyone is seated down at a table. And we generally have done these in person. So there is the benefit of getting interested parties to sit down at a table, work through the issues, see what the agency has identified, and then once that sense of interaction is achieved, it's just natural that settlements often occur literally within days, following those conferences. I do think that boards select the matters that they think will be most appropriate for those type of conferences. Some cases may not be suited for such a conference. And I would not want to speak on behalf of the Board of Accountancy as to what criteria they use, but that would be something for the Board of Pharmacy to evaluate itself, to especially identify very complex cases that have I would guess the prospect of taking a long time to work through might be, shortened considerably through this process.
Who is in attendance at these conferences?
Typically, the licensee, in almost all cases, these are sophisticated licensees. They will bring their attorney. The board will have a representative from the enforcement staff, and then a member from the Attorney General's office is present. And they are shown a draft of the act.
No board members are included.
No, because if the matter's not resolved,
yes,
it has to go through the regular process.
Understood. Thank you.
Great, thank you for your comments. That's really helpful. So members and Anne, I think that we could discuss, could prepare some more information and discuss this at our next board meeting or our next committee meeting. Because I would look at, looking at what's in attachment 6 is coming up with another flow chart that would be our suggestion. Because it sounds like we need to see that. And then also we need to have a little bit more discussion about the cases that should be limited or only the cases that should be included. I don't know if we're going to include them as a pro, like has to be in this list, or cannot be these cases, either way. But it sounds like we need to have some discussion about what certain types of cases would be included or excluded. And then next steps, what do we need to do operationally to move forward if the full board were to agree? And would those be the steps that we're looking at?
Yes, those sound good. And, should the committee be and the board be agreeable, I'd like to partner with the AG's office on a lot of this.
Yeah, because I was actually going to say I would love to get some recommendations on what kind of cases we should, where do you cut it? What kind of cases we should put into this. And I think the AG's office could provide that to us. Do we want to, since we have a full board meeting next week, do we feel maybe we should just put this before the full board and make sure they're on board? Because I'd hate for us to spend, 2 or 3 meetings like nailing this all down and then finding that the mood of the full board is, nah, we don't really like this idea.
Well, we will be discussing at the full board what we talked about today. Right. And I think we could tell that we are working on the next steps because we certainly need to have some of these, I would really like to have a picture, like a flow chart, like Appendix 6, and then have some more discussion about the limited case. I don't think we could turn that around that quickly, but maybe we could get a straw vote as to what their preference, if we're on the right track.
Yeah, I would just like to have and maybe it doesn't have to be a formal vote, but I would like to have some sort of nod of confidence that, I feel like, this group is good, but like I said, I'd hate for us to put a bunch of work in and then find out we have a strong opposition once we get to the full board. So yeah, I agree with you. We don't have to have like the flow chart, but I think maybe we ask, is anybody vehemently opposed or something?
Good idea.
Albert?
Yes.
Yeah, we have the majority of the member here. We got 6 out of the 10 here already. So we'll take a straw vote and then, to see where we're heading.
Yeah, because I don't think we have enough fleshed out to actually have a vote to move forward, but we still have, I think, at least one more meeting to bring all this information together so that we could have a pretty good package.
Yeah.
And I agree.
Maybe aim for the July meeting to present to the board, like to have something to actually give to the board.
For sure, I think that's a good goal. We could do that. And do we need any kind of motion for staff to continue to work on that, or is that fine?
Yeah, I don't think a motion is required. Thank you.
So any other member comments?
No, I think this is a great solution.
We have a little bit of a plan moving forward, but let's hear from the public as their comments, any public comment regarding our plan moving forward.
All right, this is the moderator and the Q&A panel is now available. If any member of the public would like to make a comment, please type, I would like to make a comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and submit it to all panelists. We are displaying instructions. All right, I'm not seeing any requests for public comment at this time. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Please do, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I think we have an action plan for this complicated subject. I appreciate everyone's hard work on getting us to some next steps. The next item on the agenda is item 13,
Maria?
review and discussion. Yes,
Maria, before we go next item, can I make a comment on see if we could put a item on the next agenda, on the next committee agenda?
it will be on the next agenda.
No, what I'm saying, I would like, well, see if I'm in the right place. I would like to put on the DUI disciplinary on the future agenda on our committee here. The DUI disciplinary.
What about it?
Yeah, I would like to. I would like to, see if we can modify it, the way that we treat the DUI.
Anne, can you help us to figure out how to word that agenda item? Because I'm not quite sure what Albert wants to discuss.
So maybe, Maria, we can work offline in terms of developing an agenda item. But as I understand the question, it would be, what my recommendation would be, to look at it through the lens of the board's disciplinary guidelines that really detail out how you handle different kinds of provisions. And so perhaps it's reviewing the board's disciplinary guidelines as it relates to DUIs.
Right. Yeah, that's what
okay.
I'm okay with that.
Thank you, Albert. And
okay.
Anne will work with the specific agenda item so it encompasses that.
Right. Thank you.
Okay. And to remind members that anytime you have an idea for items for the agenda, feel free to reach out to me or to Anne. So we certainly can add to the agenda. Other than just our public comment, the members can add to the agenda too. Let's go on to item 13, review and discussion of enforcement statistics. Attachment 7 includes the enforcement statistics for the first 6 months of this year. These are our routine statistics. Do you have any questions, members? Let's see if we have any public comment.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. I will go ahead and open the Q&A panel. And if any member of the public would like to make a comment, just type "I would like to make a comment" using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and submit it to all panelists. We are displaying instructions.
Don't see any comments. The last item on the agenda, I'm sorry.
No, I don't either.
Okay, thank you. The last item on the agenda is 14. You can tell I'm anxious to finish up here. Future committee meetings. Well, our next committee meeting is scheduled for July 15th, and that will be for this committee. And then following that month, we'll have a full board meeting to be able to discuss the items that we talked about today and at that meeting. Thank you for your time. It was a long day. I appreciate your attendance and helping us to discuss some of these more complicated issues in a methodical way. I do appreciate the board members and the members of the public for their engagement. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Okay,
well done.
Everybody take care and stay safe.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Yes.
Thank you. Good job.